Chapter 335. Vivian. Soren caught the little girl who rushed over, hugged her petite body and turned around. Then he lowered his head and kissed her red cheeks. The little girl wrapped her arms around Soren's neck and hung on his body. She arched in his arms like a kitten and took a deep breath. Then she looked up at Gloria next to her and opened her arms to ask for a hug. Vivian opened her arms and threw herself at her. "Sister Gloria. I missed you so much." Seeing the cute little girl, a gentle smile appeared on Gloria's face. She reached out to catch the little girl and stroked her long hair as she said in a gentle voice, "Vivian, I'm sorry. I missed you too." The little girl hung onto Gloria's body and buried her head in her chest, as if she was very comfortable. After a while, she suddenly frowned slightly and sniffed Gloria's body like a puppy, causing Gloria's expression to become a little uncomfortable. The little girl sniffed Gloria's body and muttered, "Sister Gloria has big brother's smell." Upon hearing Vivian's words, a bright blush appeared on Gloria's face, making her appear particularly charming and alluring. "Oh." The little girl wriggled in her arms, and then moved her little nose to her full chest. She sniffed seriously at the spot near the top, and even used her little hand to pinch it lightly. She muttered to herself, "The smell is the strongest here." Slap. Gloria was a little angry and slapped the little girl's but gently. Her charming face was already red. She held Vivian and walked forward with her head down. Even her earlobes were already red. Before leaving, she gave Soren a slightly reproachful look. As for Soren, he didn't blush at all. He only looked into the distance to hide his embarrassment. Since when did Vivian's nose become so powerful? She could even tell which part of his body he liked to play with. The little girl seemed to have understood something. After all, she grew up in the slums and was far more mature than other children of her age. She poked her head out and looked at Soren, then looked at the blushing Gloria. She stretched out her pink little finger and scratched her face, saying mischievously, "Shy. Sister Gloria. Did you do something shameful with Big Brother?" Slap. Ouch. It hurts. The little girl pursed her lips and touched her, but that was slapped again. She didn't say anything else. But her big eyes rolled around a few times. No one knew what she was thinking. However, her expression was one of curiosity. After all, she was just a 9-year-old child. The little girl soon forgot about this matter. Then, she held Gloria's finger with her little white hand and led her around the camp. At the same time, her little face was still full of pride. She pulled Gloria forward and told her that the stone road was just completed the day before yesterday. She was the one who killed all the monsters nearby. The two of them walked for a while, and a fenced encampment appeared in front of them. Now, it looked like it had the size of a town. Soren was slightly behind because he had to transport the goods. Vivian led Gloria forward and explained everything in a crisp voice. After all, she was also involved in the construction of the camp. At the same time, it was very different from when Soren left. First of all, the fences were much higher than before. It was now 3 stories thick. It wouldn't be easily knocked down by strong beasts. At the same time, it was convenient to increase the number of arrow towers. There were currently 16 arrow towers in the entire camp. In terms of scale, it was comparable to many medium-sized towns. The next step was to build a city wall. This was too time-consuming and costly. Soren had no plans to build a city wall at the moment. It was estimated that he might not need it for a year or 2. There was a row of guards at the east gate of the camp, but not all of them were lazy pirates. There were also drow warriors. Gloria couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. Because Soren had some things to tell her, when she saw these drow warriors with cold expressions, even Gloria, who had always been calm, was slightly moved. She seemed to be a little shocked by the speed of Soren's development. It was not easy to subdue a drow. "Miss." The drow warrior, who looked quite young, bowed his head slightly to the little Vivian. At the same time, he turned his gaze to Gloria. He seemed to have seen a little bit of Gloria's strength. His expression was quite shocked. He bowed his head respectfully and said, "Welcome to the camp. Your Excellency the Witch." Drows were always a race that worshipped the strong. Gloria nodded slightly, then followed Vivian into the camp. She noticed that these drows were not afraid of the sun. It seemed that they were not pure drows, but more like half-drows. Only half-drows could move so easily on the ground, and they seemed to have the blood of albino drows. She didn't know where Soren found these people. Such drows were very rare after the fall of the Dark Maiden. There were neat square roads in the camp. It was different from any town Gloria had seen before. As soon as she walked into the camp, she felt a strong visual impact. It was not because of the shocking buildings. Instead, everything here was very neat and tidy, more so than any city she had ever seen. The straight roads were divided into 4 areas, and the drainage canals on both sides were the same. All the houses were built in the same style. They looked very novel and tidy. She couldn't say that they were ingenious buildings, but the neat rows on both sides of the street were pleasing to the eye. With just a glance, Gloria liked this place a little more. She liked this neat and clean environment. There was no feces on the road. Even though there were a lot of people here, there was no foul smell in the air. Although the pirates were a little unrestrained, they obviously knew a lot of rules. When they saw Gloria, who was walking with Vivian, they all bowed slightly to show their respect. There was a blacksmith's shop in the corner of the street, and the busiest and noisiest place was the 3 taverns. For the pirates, it was very uncomfortable to have no wine, but there were no common fights here. Because Soren specially set up a martial arts arena, any personal grievances must be solved in the arena. Duels between conflicts between pirates also required the presence of the leaders. Gloria saw a lot of slaves. However, they were different from the slaves in other places. Although they were dressed in rags, they were strong. Their faces were not sallow and thin. Some even looked rosy, which meant that they had more food. From the west gate, she could see carts of bricks and tiles being transported. There were also many areas that had been divided but had not been built yet. Many craftsmen were busy, and among them, there were even obvious oriental faces. Among the rather lazy pirates, there were some pirates with serious expressions who were responsible for patrolling. Gloria saw a trace of an army from them. Basically, in every patrol team, there were drow warriors with serious faces. Their equipment and strength were extraordinary. Outside the south gate was a piece of land that was being reclaimed. Groups of indigenous slaves were working in the fields. The first deep plowing required more preparation, and there were fierce-looking pirate supervisors nearby. Quality fertilizer was needed here. Otherwise, the harvest of the first year of reclamation would be very poor, even if the soil here was quite fertile. Gloria silently watched everything in front of her. The more she looked, the more surprised she was because she knew how short Soren was to build all this. It could be said that if it were her, even with the help of the Witch Council, it would be impossible to reach the current scale in a short time, not to mention that there was already a vague prototype of a city here. It was hard to imagine. If Soren was given a period of time to develop, what kind of city could he finally build in the outer islands? Chapter 336. Soren naturally had a lot of things to do. In fact, as soon as he reached the shore, one of his men came to report, but because Gloria was next to him, he waved his hand and told him to wait. Later on, Gloria was taken to the camp by Vivian, and Soren naturally had to deal with the matters during this period of time. Although he left Vivian here, the one in charge was still the pirate leader below. Moreover, Soren found that the relationship between his men seemed to be a little subtle, and there was a faint sign that they were divided into factions. Among the many pirate leaders in name, the one with the highest status should be Adele Isabella. She had the most men, and her strength was above the high grade. However, after the half-elf first mate, Kasa, was praised by Soren for doing a good job, and after he was given a part of the overseas voyage to take care of, the half-elf first mate status also rose sharply. For a long time, this half-elf first mate had the intention to compete with Adele Isabella. Last time, he successfully plundered the pirate king Ashrod's eastern fleet, bringing back a large amount of wealth and an ocean fleet, so his strength had in turn surpassed Adele's. On the other hand, because Adele failed to contact the Alchemy Guild, not only did she not complete Soren's task, but also delayed for a period of time, so before Soren left for the north, he did not have the chance to see her. Therefore, the pirates below were obviously less in awe of her. Pirates were a group of people who respected and obeyed the strong. Since Adele Isabella did not do a good job and did not complete the task of His Excellency Throat Cutter, the pirate leaders below would naturally look down on her. In addition, she was still a woman, so at the moment, her position in the camp was more awkward. Before Soren left, the construction of the camp was assigned to the pirate leaders below. Among them, the half-elf first mate was the manager. When Adele Isabella returned to the camp, he naturally would not give her the power in his hands. As a result, Adele was now like a pirate leader with a figurehead. Although she still had a lot of people under her command, she was actually quite idle every day. Other pirate leaders, such as the One-Eyed Man, the Butler, the Giant Hunter, all nicknames, and so on, were not satisfied with a woman on top of their heads. Therefore, when the half-elf first mate divided the factions, they also formed their own small circles and faintly intended to isolate her. No matter what, it was always more difficult for a woman to stand out among the pirates than a man. Moreover, Adele's strength was not enough to suppress the other pirate leaders. If she was a legendary profession, her position would naturally be unshakable. However, she was only a high-grade professional, and the gap between her and the other pirate leaders was not very big, so once she was isolated, even her subordinates were a little shaken. The pirates weren't fools. Although they were all working for His Excellency Throat Cutter, these pirate minions naturally knew which pirate leader had more power, was more important to His Excellency Throat Cutter, and which pirate leader had more money under him. Therefore, Soren saw Adele's awkward position at a glance. The other pirate leaders stood in a circle, the half-elf first mate stood at the front, and Adele stood alone with her arms crossed. Her expression was a little cold, and she didn't like them. "Your Excellency Throat Cutter. Your Excellency Throat Cutter." When Soren came over, many pirate leaders in front of him immediately bowed their heads to show respect. Adele looked at Soren with a hesitant expression, and finally just stood aside with a lonely expression. She didn't complete the task, and this failure made her feel frustrated. "Let people transport the things down." Soren glanced at the others, then his eyes fell on the half-elf first mate and Adele, and slowly said, "Everyone else, leave. Casa and Adele stay." The pirate leaders below looked at each other, bowed, and left. The half-elf first mate glanced at Adele and stood motionless. His Excellency Throat Cutter was a person who valued ability. During this time, he desperately rushed the construction. For this reason, he even used a little cruel means to suppress the dissatisfaction of his subordinates. Wasn't it to let His Excellency Throat Cutter see his ability? Now the construction progress of the camp had increased by at least 30%. Although there were some cruel means in the process, the people below had been suppressed by him. In all aspects, he had completed the task perfectly. Therefore, the half-elf first mate was very confident. He believed that His Excellency Throat Cutter knew who could serve him the most. Well done. Soren glanced at the lighthouse, the road, and the dock, and slowly said, "It seems that giving these to you is the right decision. Have you encountered any trouble during this time?" Hearing Soren's words, Adele's expression dimmed, and the half-elf first mate showed a confident smile. He bowed his head slightly to show his awe, and then said in a deep voice, "There hasn't been any big trouble during this time, but a week ago, we met the indigenous people of other tribes. It seemed to be on the other side of the island. The ones we encountered were all indigenous scouts. They didn't attack us, but they sent people to monitor the river. There are also the Quetzalcoatlus nearby. Half a month ago, we had 3 slaves taken away from us. But later, they didn't attack us again. It should be just an accident. In addition, His Excellency Throat Cutter, we recently found a group of dark-tide fishmen at the port. At present, there is no conflict with us, but we should still be careful." Soren nodded and said, "I know. Good job. You take people to count the goods and slaves, and then settle them in the camp. The half-elf first mate bowed and left. Only Adele Isabella was left in front of Soren. The red-haired female pirate's face was a little sad, and she bowed her head and said, "Your Excellency. I didn't complete the task you gave me." Soren looked at her calmly and said slowly, "I know." Adele's face was complicated. She was a little lost and sad. She murmured, "I'm incompetent." Soren didn't comfort her. He was one of the 3 pirate kings on the south coast. He was not a child who played house. He could rise rapidly in such a short time, and at the same time, draw in and control a group of elite pirates. He relied on his clear style of reward and punishment. It was true that Adele did not complete the task. The reason why Soren could make his men work so actively was because he would reward them. Therefore, if he broke the rules on Adele's side, the prestige he had built in the past would be affected. He could not indulge her just because she was a woman. Soren looked at the red-haired female pirate in front of him and said slowly, "You can put down the things in the camp for the time being. I'll be in command of the fleet for the time being. I'll send you to receive the training of the Drow warriors in 2 days. You have very good talent, and your strength is much stronger than others. I hope you can touch the edge of legendary as soon as possible. Soon. I'll have a difficult task for you. I hope you learn not only the fighting skills of the Drows, but also their insidious and cunning means. Because the task for you this time is very difficult, you need to deal with many nobles and church people who are good at playing tricks. You must learn to use conspiracy and some cruel means. The Drows are experts in this field." Hearing Soren's first sentence, Adele's face turned pale, and her delicate body shook a little. Because Soren was depriving her of her power, this punishment was too severe for her. But when she heard the next words, her eyes could not help but shine again. She nodded very seriously and said, "Your Excellency, don't worry. I will never let you down again." As long as there was a chance, she could prove herself and regain her power and status. "Very good." Soren looked at her and nodded gently, "Go. I hope to see you enter the legendary realm one day." After that, he turned and left. Adele Isabella stood in place and took a deep breath. She stared at Soren's back with a firm expression, and her hands could not help but clench into fists. She was unwilling. How could she be willing to be easily surpassed by a half-elf who was not as good as her? She had the blood of an Amazon flowing in her body. How could she admit defeat so easily? P.S. It will be automatically updated in the future. The time is 5 and 6 o'clock. 2 more. Chapter 337. Soren soon returned to the camp. When he returned to the camp that he had built with his own hands, Soren had a rare sense of pride on his face. It was not easy for him to get to where he was now. From an inconspicuous thief in Amber City to the pirate king who dominated the south coast. He did not know how much blood he had lost and how many injuries he had suffered along the way, but it was all worth it. Especially after seeing the foundation he had built with his own hands, Soren felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart. Because he firmly believed that as long as he was given enough time, he could rely on this place to change everything and even affect the fate of the whole world. On both sides of the spacious avenue were rows of brick houses. Soren looked at these newly built houses with satisfaction and then entered a hidden room in his residence. "Your Excellency, throat cutter." A man hidden in the shadows knelt down on one knee and respectfully said to Soren, "I have done what you asked." Soren's expression was quite cold. He nodded gently and said, "Very good. Is there any movement from the Drows? These guys have been quite honest after I left, right?" This was a rogue. And it was a rogue with a profession level of 12 or above. Not all pirates were warriors. Although very few spellcasters became pirates, it did not mean that there were no other professions. Soren was a very careful person. Therefore, from the moment he became the pirate king, he arranged another group of trustworthy elites. The number of these people was very small, less than 2 digits so far, but all of them were rogues with potential and had received simple training from Soren. They were good at sneaking and spying. Perhaps these people's combat power was not very high, but they obviously had more important uses. As a rogue, Soren attached great importance to intelligence and spies. Your Excellency. The man hidden in the shadows handed a file to Soren and then said, "The Drows have contacted their tribes several times and secretly sent some things back. However, there was no obvious movement. Because we were afraid of being discovered by them, we did not get too close." Soren did not trust the Drows. In fact, anyone who had been to the Underdark would not easily trust the Drows. Because of Soren's current strength, these Drows did not dare to act rashly and obeyed his orders. But as long as Soren was a little weaker, they would feel that they had an opportunity. The possibility of these Drows betraying him was quite high. Because this was their nature. Soren glanced at the scroll, then put it away and said, "Very good. I got it. Be careful and hide. Don't expose yourselves so easily." After that, Soren turned around and left the room. He had thousands of pirates under his command, but there were not many who could be of use to him. At the end of the day, his foundation was still lacking. Everything had to start from scratch. On the other side of the camp, under the escort of a team of pirates, Saruman, wearing a grey robe, came to the laboratory where he worked. He had an independent yard and brought a lot of alchemy equipment for his work. When he saw the camp, he was a little stunned and then said, "It seems that the place I'm going to stay in the future is not too bad." Saruman directed the 3 wizard apprentices he brought to set up the room and carefully moved the experimental equipment in. Then he looked around the environment a little. It was not difficult to turn guano stones into high-quality fertilizer. The more troublesome thing was that if he could not form high-end craftsmanship, then he would need to do it himself. His task was to find ways to turn it into a process that could be completed by wizard apprentices or ordinary people. This was not too difficult for an experienced alchemist because it was much easier to construct a steel golem and give it intelligence than this kind of chemical alchemy technique. Saruman was not in a hurry to start work. After he settled his luggage, he walked around the camp. He was a little curious about everything about Soren. "Your Excellency, wizard." A drow ranger patrolling the periphery stopped Saruman in front of him. He glanced at him, put his hand on his chest and said, "Please don't go near there. There are dangerous plants there, some man-eating plants." "Man-eating plants?" Saruman heard this and showed a curious expression. He reached out and clenched his staff, and slowly said, "Young man, don't worry. A wizard will not be in danger so easily." After that, he walked directly into the jungle. The drow ranger behind him hesitated for a moment, but he did not stop him from entering. However, he did not follow him. The plants inside were too strange. After Saruman entered, he frowned slightly. Then he cast 2 protective spells and moved forward carefully. A wizard could be confident, but he could not be arrogant. This old wizard had a lot of experience. He cautiously entered the forest and observed the plants nearby. Interesting. Interesting. Saruman seemed to have found something. He approached a huge mutated man-eating flower. After he sprinkled a little strange yellow powder, he did not know why this deadly plant did not attack. Instead, it swayed slightly as if it was asleep. Saruman walked around the mutated man-eating flower. There was a trace of obsession on his face. He reached out and stroked the roots of the man-eating flower and murmured, "Beautiful. Dangerous. Deadly. At the same time, full of strong vitality." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, as if he was feeling something. He said to himself, "There's also the smell of magic. Who created you?" Saruman carefully used his dagger to cut open the roots of the man-eating flower, and then took away some blood-like liquid. After that, he circled around and took away some seed-like things, and then slowly left the place. On the other side, Gloria was also brought to her residence by Vivian. She was settled next to the big house where Soren lived. Meow. When Gloria was pulled into the room by the little girl, she suddenly heard a cat's meow. Then she saw Vivian rush in with a cheer, and then she pulled out a little girl with obvious beast characteristics. The little girl was about the same height as Vivian. She wore a beautiful floral dress, had a pair of furry cat ears, and a curled tail. Other than that, she was similar to a human. Gloria had been shocked many times today, so when she saw the cat girl in front of her, she calmed down a lot. She frowned and said, "Beast? Cat girl? I thought this kind of creature was extinct." Vivian pushed the little cat girl in front of Gloria and smiled, "Sister Gloria. Her name is Lulu Meow. Don't look at her small size. She's actually very strong." Gloria couldn't help but smile. She looked at the cat girl who was about the same height as Vivian and teased, "Is she very strong? What can she do?" The little girl nodded confidently and said in a crisp voice, "She can do somersaults." Pfft, Gloria chuckled and reached out to stroke the little girl's head. Then she looked at the cat girl and said slowly, "Can she speak?" The cat girl seemed to understand something and opened her mouth and said, "Meow. Lulu. Meow." Gloria showed a look of understanding and said slowly, "It seems that she still can't speak. But it's okay, let me help you." She opened her mouth and uttered a strange spell, and then a magic light appeared in her palm. When Gloria pressed her palm on the cat girl's forehead, the other party's petite body trembled, and then her eyes became blank. This blankness lasted for about half a minute, and then her expression became clear. She opened her mouth and said like a child who had just learned to speak, "Lulu. Sister. Ma. Master." Just a few words. She seemed to be a little anxious, and her voice suddenly changed, "Meow. Lulu. Meow." Gloria leaned over and stroked the cat girl's little head. She said slowly, "Don't worry. I just helped you with a spell. It can help you complete the enlightenment, but you still need to learn it slowly." Chapter 338. The cat girl's intelligence didn't seem to be very high. In fact, most were creatures weren't very smart, but that didn't matter too much because they were born with the talent, beast intuition. Even if their wisdom wasn't very high, these were creatures still had strong intuition. They had a beast-like intuition for many things, and they were even more powerful when fighting in the wild. This kind of creature was actually quite rare because they weren't a naturally occurring species, but intelligent creatures that were created by some taboo experiments. It was said that there were two types of were creatures. One type was like the gnolls, with the head of a gnoll and the torso of a humanoid creature. The other type was like the cat girl in front of them, with the appearance of a human and some of the characteristics of a beast. The former was a natural reproduction, while the latter was man-made. All the rumors pointed to the taboo experiments during the Arcane Empire, because there were clear records at that time that there were great arcanists who mixed the blood of humans and animals in order to cultivate excellent servants with special purposes. They also touched the field of life and created a new species. For thousands of years, there were always conspiracy scholars who believed that the fall of the Arcane Empire was closely related to the taboo field of life. Lulu. The petite cat girl opened her mouth and seemed to be a little happy. She stuttered, Brother. Lord. Your Excellency. Master. Eat. Hungry." Her syllables were a little childish, and when she said it too quickly, it became meow. Lulu. Meow. The cat girl said the words that she heard the most. After saying about 30 to 50 words in a row, her body suddenly trembled, and she nimbly hid behind Vivian. Meow. The little cat girl seemed to be a little frightened, and she felt goosebumps all over her body. She hid behind Vivian and screamed at the door. Vivian patted the cat girl's little head and said in a clear voice, "Lulu, meow? What's wrong?" Gloria raised her head and looked at the door, and then saw Soren's figure coming in from outside. When he noticed that everyone inside was looking at him, he was a little stunned and asked in confusion, "What's wrong? Why are you all looking at me?" Vivian turned around and stroked the feline girl's hair. "Don't worry. Lulu. Big brother won't hurt you." The petite cat girl curled up her body and looked at Soren with fear in her eyes. It was like a wild beast seeing a tiger, or a new recruit who had just left the battlefield meeting a veteran who had survived hundreds of battles. Her beastly instincts made her feel something from Soren's body. It was a very thick smell of blood, which meant that the person in front of her had slaughtered many lives. Ever since she first laid eyes on Soren, he was the person she feared the most. He was even more frightening than the pirates who had captured her. Even after spending so much time with Vivian, she still couldn't get rid of her fear of Soren. Slayer. One life after another ended. Soren's body gave off a bloody aura that normal people couldn't detect. Only a creature like her could sense it. Perhaps Vivian's comforting words had some effect on him. The feline girl gradually gathered her courage and looked at Soren, but she still hid behind the little girl. Come. Vivian took the feline girl's little hand and brought her to an open space. She then said seriously, Lulu meow. Do a few somersaults. Show them what you're capable of. Perhaps because of the distance, the feline girl's nervous expression relaxed a lot. Her little hand was held by Vivian, and she seemed a little hesitant. When she met the little girl's gaze, she couldn't help but gently nod. Then Vivian retreated to the side, and the little feline girl stood on the spot and did a backflip. Not 360 degrees. It was a full 720 degrees backflip. The feline girl's petite figure landed lightly after 2 somersaults in the air, as if she didn't feel anything at all. Her limbs were so flexible that it made people speechless. Her slender waist was as if there were no bones. But this was just the beginning. The feline girl's petite body somersaulted in the air, and her speed was so fast that it was dazzling. This meant that not only did she have amazing tenacity, agility, and coordination, but she also had physical strength that was far beyond ordinary people. Meow. The petite feline girl did a side somersault and landed on the wall, but she didn't fall down. Instead, she directly clung to the wall. It was as if she was blessed with spider walk. She rolled and leaped between the walls. If one didn't look carefully, they would only see a black shadow. The vertical walls were like flat ground to her. In the end, even Soren and Gloria were shocked. Born with extraordinary agility, Soren looked quite dignified. As a top rogue, he was the one who could see the depths of the feline girl's strength. So the shocked expression on his face was the most obvious because he found that except for her coordination, the feline girl's body flexibility and sense of balance were almost the same as his. But Soren was already a high-grade profession that was close to legendary, and the feline girl in front of him looked so young. Gloria also looked dignified and said slowly, "The key is that she's not an adult yet. She has such a talent when she's underage. Her potential in the future in this area is difficult to estimate. It seems that the records are not wrong. This kind of creature has amazing talent in some aspects." Clap, clap, clap. Vivian looked at the surprised expressions on Soren and Gloria's faces with satisfaction. She seemed to be quite happy. She clapped her little hands and jumped in front of Soren, and said in a crisp voice, "Brother, isn't Lulu very powerful? I'm the one who found her talent in this area. In order to train her, I also roasted fish for her many times. It took a lot of effort." Soren and Gloria looked at each other. He leaned over and squatted down, stroked Vivian's little head, and said softly, "She's very powerful. If she can be trained well, she may become a good helper for Vivian. When she's an adult in the future, I'll help you teach her something more powerful." The little girl nodded gently. But after a while, she frowned slightly and whispered, "Brother. Actually, I still want to train Lulu to be a maid. You see how beautiful she is, and her movements are so flexible. She's very good at catching dishes." Catching dishes. Soren was speechless. What was she going to train the feline girl in front of him? Chapter 339. A peaceful day passed by just like that. As March approached the outer islands, the storm season gradually arrived. On the second day after Soren's return, there was a heavy rain. Although there was no way to calculate the amount of rain, it was indeed very heavy. Many houses had slight leaks. This was something that couldn't be helped. The craftsmanship of this era was limited, so there was bound to be damage in the storm. Soren had already prepared for the weather in the outer islands. Otherwise, if it was a house with a thatched roof on the mainland, it might have been directly torn apart. The heavy rain fell with a pitter-patter. Even though Soren had already planned the drainage channels in advance, he could also emphasize on repairing the roads. In the end, there was still a slight rise in the water. Because the drainage channels were just dug, they were not deep enough and the drainage capacity was too low. At the same time, the roads were a little bumpy because of the storm. The paved roads were a little better, but all the roads with mud were now muddy. Basically, there was no way for carriages to pass through. Because of this storm, the slaves were unable to work. Now, they were all detained, and at the same time, people were sent to watch over them. The natives were a little better. Some of the slaves who were just brought over from the mainland vomited and had diarrhea because of the climate. Fortunately, there were doctors with them, so there were no casualties. After all, it was troublesome to not have a priest. The weather in the outer islands was bad, so there were more storms. At the same time, because it was an area where the storm lord believed in, the storms here were often accompanied by thunderstorms. For example, now. Lightning flashed across the sky, and from time to time, it would strike the tropical rainforest in the distance. It looked like someone was going through a tribulation. This rain lasted for a whole day. If it was a wooden house, it would probably be wet inside. However, Soren had already built a lot of brick houses. From this point of view, it was more suitable for the outer island's climate. At the same time, it was also more resistant to storms. Because of the storm, the whole camp quieted down. The pirates hid in the houses to avoid the rain. The 3 taverns were already full of people. It was dark outside, and it was difficult to see more than 5 meters away. The climate here. Gloria looked up at the sky, and stood beside Soren. She reached out and held his hand, and said slowly, "I'm afraid it's not that suitable for farming. If this kind of weather happens often, the seeds won't be able to survive." Soren nodded and said with a serious expression, "I know. Fortunately, we haven't sowed the seeds this time, or else they would have been washed away. There were too many things that needed to be built in order to develop this place. Ditches for drainage and irrigation, as well as dams for flood control, all of which required a lot of labor. Now, they could only do it step by step. It's not like we can't change this climate. I'll prepare for the sea god's sacrifice in 2 days." Gloria frowned slightly and said slowly, "Borrowing the power of the gods? The price of seeking help from a deity is not small. It's a pity that I haven't advanced to legendary yet. Otherwise, I could use the power of the Adept Tower and the magic circle to forcefully change the climate of the nearby area." Soren turned around and glanced at her. He reached out and pulled Gloria into his arms. "There's no need to do that. The consumption is too great. Unless there is a sorcerer tower to maintain the energy consumption. Forcefully reversing the weather is not a problem for the time being, but there will be side effects in the future. Nature is very mysterious. Unless you have the power to change the weather, it's better to just go with the flow." Gloria couldn't understand Soren's words. She could understand them separately, but when they were put together, even she felt a little strange. But she was still a witch full of wisdom, so she could roughly understand what Soren meant. She nodded gently and leaned her head on Soren's shoulder. "You can borrow the power of the gods for a short period of time, but in the long run, you will become dependent on them. This is not good for your rule here. The influence of the gods will be greater than your prestige." Soren took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I know. You just need to hold on for a while." Rumble. A bolt of lightning struck down, and the electric light was like a dancing dragon. Soren stood under the eaves and looked at the sky. His eyes seemed to be able to see through space, and he saw more things. It was the realm of the gods, and there was the power he needed. The rainstorm lasted for 3 days before it stopped. Soren's camp was flooded. Although it was a bit of a headache, it also exposed some of the shortcomings of the construction plan. After the rainstorm stopped, he quickly mobilized people to repair the damaged roads and houses. After the rainstorm, the sky was clear and boundless. It seemed that there would not be a storm for a short period of time. In terms of climate, farming here required good weather. However, when one's strength reached a certain level, they could also change the weather. The busy morning quickly passed. After the initial inseparable relationship, Soren and Gloria also returned to their usual routine. Soren was busy setting up the camp, and at the same time practicing his spellcasting proficiency. In the afternoon, he practiced his combat skills. The Drow and Adele were his sparring partners. Gloria usually did her research in the house, and occasionally went out for a walk. Recently, the man-eating plants slightly attracted her attention, but she quickly turned her attention to the study of the shadow plane. Gloria hoped to build a portal and use the gap in the shadow plane to stabilize the connection between the two worlds. This way, they could return to the material plane at any time and close the portal if they encountered any unexpected situations while exploring the wizard tower. This was the safest way. In addition, they maintained the frequency of once every 3 days, enjoying each other's time. Whether it was Soren or Gloria, they were not the kind of people who would easily indulge in lust. They had pursuits that were above the physical body, which was above the realm of the mortal world. Perhaps because of Gloria's existence, Soren's murderous aura was a lot lighter than before. This made many pirates grateful to Her Excellency the Witch. In the past, Soren was definitely an existence that killed people without blinking. His means were cruel, bloody, and ruthless. The pirates under his command always feared him more than respected him. Now, Soren rarely killed people. Even if some of his men made mistakes, they would only be whipped. Being whipped was much better than being beheaded. The slaves began to get busy. The camp needed to be developed, and there were still many things to do. It was really not easy to start from scratch. Sometimes, even Soren felt tired. But it was all worth it, because the foundation had been established here. Even the Drows, after seeing the growth of this place with their own eyes, gradually felt a little more recognition. There were even Drow warriors who proposed to move their tribe here. It was safer, more comfortable, and more convenient here. There was plenty of food, excellent equipment, and all kinds of daily necessities. But because there were still some among the Drows who were worried that Soren would turn from cooperation to annexation and eat up the entire Drows, the female Drows in the tribe were quite opposed to this. Soren was not in a hurry. He was ready to leave this to time. If they still didn't understand when the time came, then don't blame Soren for using some cruel means. A large area of wasteland had been reclaimed in the south of the camp. But it hadn't been sown yet. It would probably be around March. The burning of bricks and building of houses was still in full swing. Soren's initial plan was nearly 500 houses, enough to settle all of his men, and even a small number of slaves. The wizard Saruman had begun to study how to turn the guano stones into high-quality fertilizer. It was estimated that there would be results in about a month or so. At that time, it was almost time to start sowing the fields, and the slaves from the continent had mastered the deep plowing. The farming here must be done carefully. Recently, Soren learned from his men that Saruman was very interested in the man-eating plants, which aroused his curiosity. But fortunately, Saruman didn't delay the business, so Soren didn't ask too much. In the afternoon, Soren was practicing the White Raven sword style in the training ground. Just as he finished fighting with Adele, suddenly, the slaves and pirates shouted in the distance. Bang! Soren seemed to have heard something, and his figure immediately flew out and rushed in the direction of the cultivated land. One after another, vigorous figures rose from the ground. Soren's pirate leaders ran out one after another. They jumped and landed on the roof, and then quickly approached the cultivated land. They had already felt a sense of belonging to a faction that was thriving and growing stronger. Close to 10 pirate leaders with strength around grade 4 quickly approached, and then they jumped over the fence and rushed to the cultivated land. Of course, the one at the front was Soren. As his figure gradually approached, he immediately saw two huge Quetzalcoatlus in front of him. They flapped their dragon wings and swooped down from the sky, and their huge dragon claws instantly pierced through the two native slaves. In the midst of the dying screams, the Quetzalcoatlus grabbed their prey like an eagle and flew away. "You're courting death." Soren's face was gloomy. When he saw the Quetzalcoatlus killing his slaves in front of him, a trace of anger and killing intent immediately emerged in his heart. Swoosh! 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 Soren's elven war bow appeared in his hand. After the distance was within range, he shot a series of arrows. Most of them hit the Quetzalcoatlus, but most of them hit the wings of the Quetzalcoatlus. The Quetzalcoatlus let out a cry, and its body shook a little, but it still flew further and further away. Trying to run? Soren expressionlessly chanted a spell, and his figure directly rose into the air. Fly! His figure flew into the sky, and at the same time, in an instant, he put another arrow on the bow and aimed at the abdomen of the Quetzalcoatlus. P.S. There's another chapter for today. After writing this chapter, I feel much more realistic. It's a feeling of inspiration coming back. Chapter 340. Fly. This was a very important spell for wizards. However, this spell also had a very big limitation. That was, fly required the caster to maintain it. It was not realistic to fly in the sky and bombard the enemy because it required abilities that were quite difficult to master. Even fighter jets needed to fly back and forth to attack continuously. If wizards wanted to cast spells while flying, they naturally had higher requirements for abilities. Those were the abilities, combat casting, and flight casting. Without the support of these two abilities, the result of forcibly casting spells was likely to backfire, and then the whole person would fall from the sky. Soren did not have the ability to cast spells while flying, nor did he have the ability to cast spells while fighting. Therefore, he could not cast spells in the sky at all. Once he cast a spell, the failure rate was more than 90%. However, in the flying state, it did not affect him from doing other actions, such as putting an arrow on the bow. This action was not considered casting spells, and it was also within the range of fly. Therefore, when Soren's figure rose into the air, he shot 3 arrows in a row. Although it was not as smooth as when he was on the ground, he still found a sense of balance with his strong dexterity. Casting spells in the flying state was equivalent to maintaining 2 spells at the same time, but shooting in the flying state was a separate matter. Swoosh! Swoosh! 3 arrows flew out. 1 hit the lower back of the Quetzalcoatlus, 1 hit the side of the Quetzalcoatlus's abdomen, and the last one hit the lower jaw directly. Half of the arrow was embedded in the lower jaw. Judgment of death. Soren's attack seemed to have triggered the judgment of death. The Quetzalcoatlus wailed and shook, and then its huge body fell down shakily. The strong immunity of the dragon subspecies allowed it to avoid the judgment of death, but it gradually fell from the air. At the same time, a series of data prompts appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Target hit. You have dealt 16 piercing damage to the target. You have acquired some information about the ability, precise shooting. Target hit. You have dealt 27 piercing damage to the target. You have acquired some information about the ability, moving shooting. Target hit. You have dealt 54 piercing damage to the target. Hit the enemy's vital point. Judgment of death triggered. Target has passed the judgment of death. You have obtained partial information about the ability, flying shooting. Soren was surprised to see so many notifications popping up in front of him. He didn't expect so many notifications to pop up at once. The most important attribute that affected long-range attacks was dexterity, and Soren's dexterity was almost legendary. Therefore, he was very talented in archery. Even if he was not familiar with it in the past, the speed at which he grasped it was quite fast, not to mention that he had many other specialties to support him. That was why the leader of the Drow warriors suggested Soren to try archery, because he saw Soren's talent in this area. Soren's quasi-legendary tier stats had strengthened his mastery of the bow and arrow. At the same time, it had also greatly increased the speed at which he could master such abilities. Soren had already discovered this in the past. Temporarily buffing one's attributes would greatly increase the speed of mastering a skill. The Quetzalcoatlus was about to fall to the ground. The body of the indigenous slave that it had started to hunt had already fallen. Although it didn't fall directly, it had lost its sense of balance. If it didn't fall, it would be crippled even if it didn't die. Soren wasn't in a hurry to harvest the slaughter EXP. He directly aimed at another Quetzalcoatlus. Swoosh! This time, Soren slowed down a little. He aimed at the head of the Quetzalcoatlus and shot it directly. The arrow turned into a cold light, but because of the air and wind speed, there was a slight deviation. It shot under the neck of the Quetzalcoatlus and did not hit the vital part of the head. The notification didn't appear. The first notification was the easiest to obtain. The difficulty of obtaining the next two notifications would gradually increase. These required time to accumulate. Roar! There was a scream. The Quetzalcoatlus let go of the corpse under its claws, then flapped its wings and accelerated, flying directly toward the distant mountains. It was scared. Even monsters would be scared, especially when their own kind fell in such a short time. Swoosh! Swoosh! Soren shot continuously and shot all the arrows in one breath. Unfortunately, the power of the bow and arrow was greatly reduced after the distance was drawn. Only some of the arrows hit the dragon's wings. The damage caused was not enough to threaten the Quetzalcoatlus. The speed of fly was not as fast as the Quetzalcoatlus flying at full speed. Soren watched the enemy fly further and further away. In the end, he could only land helplessly. It was much more convenient to fly in the sky with wings. The dragon was still the overlord of the sky. No one would fight with the dragon in the air. Patter. Soren landed gently on the ground. Behind him came the cheers of his subordinates and the sound of other pirate leaders approaching. He rushed directly to the Quetzalcoatlus that fell in front of him. Even if it fell from such a high altitude, it still maintained its body. After landing, it didn't directly die, but there were traces of fractures in its legs and abdomen. Not far away was the body of the indigenous slave. Its abdomen was directly pierced through by the dragon's claws, and a large part of its intestines spilled out. Soren's expression was cold. He frowned and approached. Then he slashed at the Quetzalcoatlus's head. Poochie! Blood splattered out of the wound. Soren cut off the Quetzalcoatlus's head, then frowned and looked at the mountain in the distance. Your Excellency. The half-elf first mate and the red-haired female pirate approached. When they saw Soren, they bowed slightly. The half-elf first mate said, it was these two Quetzalcoatlus that attacked the slaves. One of them had a scar on its tail. I remember it very clearly. Quetzalcoatlus. A dragon subspecies with a challenge rating of 8 to 12, a monster level between 15 to 18, and a small number of special bloodlines could reach the legendary level. Soren glanced at the Quetzalcoatlus's body in front of him and slowly said, let people transport the body back. These Quetzalcoatlus won't dare to attack again for the time being. We'll deal with them in 2 days. It's time to clean up the monsters nearby. The Quetzalcoatlus looked a bit like the Quetzalcoatlus of the Jurassic era. Its body was quite large, with sharp dragon claws and fangs. It was very aggressive. Its neck was very long, which was a relatively obvious weakness. As a dragon subspecies that was difficult to deal with, it was still a bit difficult for Soren's men to challenge them. Soon, the others rushed over. A Quetzalcoatlus's weight was close to 2 or 3 tons. It took 20 or 30 people to carry it back. Behind them, a bearded pirate held the Quetzalcoatlus's head. When they returned to the camp, someone immediately raised the Quetzalcoatlus's head. Immediately, there were cheers from the pirates below. Even the slaves cheered and looked at Soren with eyes full of awe. Strength could always suppress a lot of things. The continuous attacks of the Quetzalcoatlus also made the slaves feel fear. However, the creatures that they feared were easily killed by Soren. He was not the same as before. The Quetzalcoatlus that risked his life to challenge was now no longer Soren's opponent. When Soren returned to the camp, Gloria also happened to come out. She heard the cheers outside and came out to see. Gloria glanced at the bloody corpse of the Quetzalcoatlus in the distance and frowned slightly. "What's wrong?" Soren saw her smile and said slowly, "There's a Quetzalcoatlus's nest nearby. They just attacked the slaves. I killed one of them, but the other one escaped." Gloria nodded slightly, raised her hand to lift the long hair on her earlobe, and smiled playfully. "Do you need me to do it?" "No." Soren also smiled and said, "I'll take care of them tomorrow. You focus on studying the magic circle. It's best if you can stabilize a portal that can be closed and opened. The shadow plane connected here always gives me a strong sense of crisis. If we can come and go freely, we can deal with it much more easily." Gloria nodded and said softly, "Okay. I know." The Quetzalcoatlus was quickly carried away and skinned. The pirates were eager to taste the dragon meat. The drow warriors were also pointing at it. As agile warriors, they could not equip the expensive mithril and fine gold armor. The rare leather armor made of dragon skin was the best armor they could get. However, the drow warriors were not easy to speak because they had not completely surrendered to Soren. Their status was not as good as those elite pirates. In fact, only a small part of the rare weapons shipped back from the north were allocated to the drow warriors. Most of them were used to arm the core pirates under Soren's command. Rewards could not be given randomly. If he only wanted to win over the drow warriors, wouldn't it make the pirates below feel bitterly disappointed? Now these pirates were Soren's most loyal subordinates. On the other side, the leader of the drow warriors, Dark Blade, looked at everything in front of him and fell into deep thought. After a while, he called a drow ranger, whispered a few words, and then said, "Send someone back the news. He's getting stronger and stronger. Warn those stubborn females not to act rashly. This person is not so easy to take advantage of. They only want to use his strength to strengthen their tribe, but they don't think that the one feeding them is a tiger." Proud female drow. These female elves, who ruled the Underdark and had a status far higher than that of males, had not fully recognized Soren's identity until now. For Dark Blade, this was a very dangerous thing. This was because he knew very well how dangerous this throat cutter was and how cruel his methods were. He was worried about what terrible things would happen when Soren's patience ran out. Chapter 341. Clang. Clang. The whistling sound of the wind was accompanied by the sound of weapons clashing. Then, Gloria's playful voice rang out, "That's it? So you're such a useless man. Where are your spells? How could it be interrupted so easily? Weren't you so smug last night? Why aren't you showing your male chauvinism now? Come on. Attack me with spells. You're as soft as a woman now. What happened to last night's bravery? Could it be that your legs have gone soft?" Clang. Clang. Gloria was wearing a tight white dress. She was as beautiful as a blooming snow lotus, but her attacks were unusually fierce. It was as if she had been buffed with draconic strength. She swung her heavy staff and swept it at Soren's vitals. As a northern witch who was close to legendary, she was not without the slightest melee ability. On the contrary, the high-grade wizards in this world had received melee training. It could be said that even if she didn't use magic, her melee combat was equivalent to that of a second-tier warrior. "Come on." Gloria's charming face blushed slightly. Perhaps it was because of the physical exhaustion, or perhaps it was because she was a little excited by what she had said. She said in a mocking tone, "Is that all you can do? Or do you only know how to play the hero on top of women at night? Are you so easily distracted and interrupted in battle?" Her full breasts bounced up and down along with her vigorous movements, creating a very attractive arc clang. Gloria executed a beautiful spinning sweep, forcing Soren to take a step back. At the same time, she leaped up and swung her staff at Soren's head. Ha! Soren took a deep breath. There was an indescribable expression on his face. In any case, he looked quite depressed. From the beginning to the end, he only defended and did not attack, so he was forced into a difficult situation by Gloria's unrestrained attacks. There were a few times when he had the time to cast a spell, but it was immediately interrupted by his opponent's ferocious attacks. After blocking and dodging 2 rounds of attacks, Soren finally found the opportunity to fire 2 arcane missiles back. They couldn't even break through Gloria's defensive energy field. The result of the battle made Soren feel a little frustrated. It was as if he was being suppressed. Clang! Clang! After a new round of attacks, Gloria retreated like a butterfly. Her plump chest heaved up and down as she took a deep breath and said, "Let's stop here for today." After all, a wizard's physical strength was inferior to a melee profession. Soren put away his scimitar in frustration. He raised his head and looked at the woman in front of him, who had an inexplicably excited expression on her face. He said in a muffled voice, "I didn't expect you to be so good at taunting people." This woman had taunted him. Why didn't he realize that she had such a good taunting skill before? The words she said during the battle did affect Soren's performance. Weakness. Soren was a very strong man. Even if he had a strong will and determination, he still couldn't help but be affected when a woman taunted him about his sex life, especially when it was his own woman. Gloria gave him a mischievous look. She lifted her fair fingers and gently lifted the ends of her hair. She put on a gentle smile and said, "A wizard must learn to ignore the taunts of their enemies. This is the first lesson of mastering combat spellcasting. Many enemies can see through your emotions and use words to provoke you, thus affecting your spellcasting. Maybe you won't be affected in close combat, but from the perspective of spellcasting, you're not focused enough. Mastering combat spellcasting is not only about dealing with your enemy's attacks, but also learning to ignore their taunts. Focus was the key to combat spellcasting." Gloria, who was still valiant a moment ago, had now turned back into a gentle and charming woman. It was as if the person who had said all kinds of provocative and even shameful words to provoke Soren was not her at all. She raised her eyebrows slightly and untied her hair, letting her silky hair casually fall. She glanced at Soren and playfully said, "Are you angry?" "No." Soren replied in a muffled voice. Then he directly walked over, picked up the noble witch in front of him, and carried her on his shoulder. He then turned around and walked into the room. Scoundrel. Gloria seemed to have foreseen what was going to happen next. Her charming face was flushed, but she didn't struggle. Instead, she lightly punched Soren's shoulder and whispered, "Petty man. You said yourself that you wouldn't be angry no matter what I say during training." "Pa." Soren raised his hand and slapped her round buttocks. He said in a muffled voice, "I'm really not angry. I just feel like I need to prove myself again." Gloria's body softened when she heard this. Her face became redder and redder. She acted like a spoiled child and begged for mercy. "I was wrong. You were as fierce as a tiger last night." Soren kicked the door open and continued in a muffled voice, "It's too late." He caressed her round buttocks and pinched them a few times. Then he threw Gloria on the bed and closed the door with a magic trick. He then reached out and grabbed the witch's full breasts, kneading them slightly. He didn't even take off her clothes and directly bit her. "Oh!" Gloria's body trembled. She reached out and grabbed Soren's neck. Her face was as red as the sunset and she said in a soft voice, "You're so petty. I clearly told you that I would find a way to provoke you during the combat training." Gentler. Ah. Annoying. Soren did not untie the clothes on Gloria's body. He lifted the corset skirt directly, then stretched out his fingers and stroked it a few times. When he took it out, it was already wet. A playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and he said slowly, "It seems that you don't mean what you say. Are you trying to provoke me with those words?" Do you feel excited too? He entered without hesitation. Soren picked up Gloria's soft body and let her sit on his body. He opened his mouth and kissed Gloria's lips. His waist moved gently like an intense drum beat. Oh! The lingering kiss made Gloria close her eyes. She blushed and hugged Soren's neck. With the impact, she slightly twisted and swayed her delicate body. In this intoxicating blend of joy, she suddenly felt Soren's lips close to her earlobe, and then he said in a low, gasping voice, "Gloria, I'm not going to give you a chance. I think I've fallen in love with you." For a short moment, her whole body stiffened. In the next moment, Gloria's body convulsed as if she had been electrocuted. She couldn't help but moan, and then her body slightly twitched. She suddenly pushed Soren down on the bed and kissed his lips. It was a little crazy and a little infatuated. After a while, Gloria gently raised her head and raised her white fingers to wipe the corners of her mouth. Her face was as delicate and charming as a blooming peach blossom. She gently pressed her palm on Soren's chest, and her slender waist swayed with the ups and downs. She said softly, "I've been waiting for you to say this for a long time. I love you. I don't know when it started, but I think this should be love. Do you know? When I first realized that I was missing a man, I felt a little overwhelmed. An intimate blend." The passionate drumbeats seemed to become a gentle lingering. Gloria leaned over and kissed Soren's lips again. Then she gently reached behind her back and unbuttoned her dress. A little bit of sunlight shone through the window. All the lust turned into tenderness, as if everything was so beautiful. Mainland, Okdo Valley. A group of fully armed warriors approached. They wore black full-body armor and their faces were cold and emotionless. They didn't look like ordinary warriors, but more like fallen dark guards. Behind these dark guards, there was a group of priests wearing long robes. They didn't wear any insignia of the gods on their chests, but this also meant that they belonged to some forces that couldn't see the light of day. Behind these people, there was a priest wearing a black robe. He looked at the valley with a cold expression and then ordered everyone to enter. Jia jia jia. A strange sound came from all directions in the valley. Vampire bats could be seen hovering in the darkness, and some strange figures leaping around the valley. They had scarlet pupils and sharp fangs exposed from the corners of their mouths. "Welcome to my territory." The demigod vampire in a blood-red dress descended from the sky. He smiled and looked at everyone in front of him. Finally, his eyes fell on the black-robed priest. He said playfully, "High Priest. I didn't expect you to come to my door so soon." The black-robed priest took a step forward and said with some anger in his voice, "You shameless thief. How dare you steal the divine power of my lord? Today I'm going to take you back." "Is that so?" The handsome face of the demigod vampire showed a mocking smile. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A large group of vampire servants suddenly appeared around him. The black-robed priest didn't have the slightest fear on his face. He looked around contemptuously and said in a deep voice, "Do you think this group of trash can help you defeat me? You're too naive." There was a short silence. Then, another thin figure appeared. He stood alone at the exit of the valley. It was as if he had isolated the nearby space, bringing an evil shadow and melody to this place. The Helpheimer played with the magic flute at his fingertips, looked up and smiled. "What if I join in?" The black-robed priest's face changed instantly. Chapter 342. Combat Spellcasting. It was a rather difficult ability to master. This might be the most difficult ability for Soren to train so far, because even a talented wizard would need at least 3 to 5 years to master combat spellcasting. The battle was ever-changing, and it was not easy to seize the opportunity to cast a spell. Many wizards would cast a defensive spell in advance, and then rely on the energy shield to fight for casting time. Even with the guidance of Gloria, Soren's progress in mastering this ability was slow. He had to admit that this woman had a very high taunting ability. While attacking and interrupting Soren's spellcasting, she could also keenly perceive Soren's emotions, and then rely on words to irritate and influence him. Damn it. Soren felt that he also needed to learn how to taunt the enemy. After all, his accumulation of basic skills was still a little shallow. The ability training could not be rushed in a short time. So after feeding Gloria, Soren began to busy himself with other things. The camp must not be left aside. In the future, whether it was Soren or Vivian, they may need the population and power here. This was to pave the way for the future of the legend. Otherwise, when the Avatar crisis broke out, he would not have the time and energy to accumulate. According to this progress, the accumulation of the population would eventually lead to a qualitative change from quantitative change. The elite pirates began to gather. Soren already had plans to clean up after the attack of the Quetzalcoatlus. The Quetzalcoatlus looked a bit like the Quetzalcoatlus of the Jurassic era. They were a little different from the familiar Quetzalcoatlus. The Quetzalcoatlus looked more like the Quetzalcoatlus in The Lord of the Rings. The Quetzalcoatlus was much easier to tame, but the Quetzalcoatlus was quite difficult. Therefore, Soren gave up the idea of taming them after a slight thought. It was difficult to find a talent who could master the art of dragon taming, and it would take a lot of time and money. Teams of elite pirates gathered, and at the same time, someone distributed the heavy javelins. However, just as Soren was ready to deal with the Quetzalcoatlus, an unexpected visitor arrived. A ship was docked at the port. It was a very special ship, and it was engraved with the emblem of the goddess of wealth. South Coast. There were neutral gods, such as the goddess of wealth, evil gods, such as the goddess of ocean, and even some demons from the abyss, as well as some evil gods hiding in the dark corners. Therefore, when the ship with the emblem of the goddess of wealth approached the port, Soren immediately put aside the matter of dealing with the Quetzalcoatlus and rushed towards the port with his men. He didn't know how the believers of the Mistress of Riches found this place. However, as the most powerful church in the South Coast, Soren could not afford to offend the Lady of Wealth, who had mid-level divine power. Wealth Church. A powerful force that remained neutral and had forces all over the world. When Soren arrived at the port, there were already many people gathered there. Pirates had always been lawless and greedy for wealth. However, when they saw these people who were covered in jewels and treasures, they became quite obedient. Some of them even bowed slightly in respect. The goddess of wealth was a widely believed god. She had a large number of followers, but because it was difficult for the wealth priesthood to produce fanatics, her divine power was still much weaker than some of the stronger gods. Sometimes, quantity might not be able to suppress quality. Your Excellency throat cutter. The person who came down from the deck was a woman wearing a silver robe with golden cuffs. She had beautiful golden hair, and 6 gemstone rings on her 10 fingers. It was said that the goddess of wealth loved gold. Many of her priests had golden hair, and these priests were covered in jewels and treasures. They liked to wear expensive jewelry, and their clothes were also exquisite and luxurious. This was a tall and voluptuous woman. She wore a string of expensive pearl necklace on her chest. She bowed slightly towards Soren and smiled, and slowly said, "Your Excellency. I have brought you the goodwill of the Mistress of Wealth." The goodwill of the Mistress of Wealth? Soren didn't relax because of this. He looked at the tall woman in front of him and slowly said, "Welcome to this deserted island. I'm very curious how you found this place." The tall woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she smiled and said, "The Mistress of Wealth has been watching us." It seemed like someone had leaked the information. Soren wasn't angry because it was difficult to hide such a big target from a powerful god's church. He was just curious how the other party knew the route here. The tall woman in front of him glanced around and looked at the port in front of her. She smiled and said, "Your Excellency has a good eye. Just the port here is enough to bring a lot of wealth in the future." Speaking of this, her expression was a little playful. "Aren't you going to invite me in to have a look?" She didn't come with good intentions. Although the other party had been smiling, Soren felt that this might not be a good thing. Because behind him stood the Sea Church. If he was accidentally involved in the confrontation between two gods' churches, it would definitely be a terrible disaster. Please. Soren turned around and made an inviting gesture. Even if he was one of the 3 pirate kings on the south coast, there was not much difference in status when facing a high-grade priest from the Church of Wealth. The necessary respect was still certain. Not many people would want to offend the Mistress of Wealth. Who would say no to money? The priest of the Goddess of Wealth showed a satisfied smile on her face. She got up and followed Soren while observing the surrounding environment. Behind her, there were 2 low-grade priests and temple warriors who were fully equipped with fine armor. The Mistress of Wealth was the richest god, so most of the temple warriors who believed in her were equipped with first-class equipment. Just the 8 temple guards behind her were enough to kill a group of elite pirates under Soren's command. Because Soren just glanced at them and saw that their weapons were mixed with adamantine. The Principality of Rossard. In the middle of an incomparably grand hall sat a woman who looked rather dangerous. She looked at the messenger below with cold eyes, and a playful smile appeared on her coquettish face. Her red lips opened slightly and said, "What do you mean? Asrid wants to form an alliance with me? Haha. Is he worthy? A puppet supported by the Naga Siren royal family. Naive enough to want to form an alliance with me. I'm afraid he can't even deal with the newly risen throat cutter. Now get out of here. Go back and tell him. He wants to form an alliance with me. Let the Naga Siren royal family behind him send a messenger here." Humiliation. The humiliation from the Duke of Red Dragon's wife made the messenger a little angry, but he didn't dare to do anything because the woman in front of him was quite terrifying and cruel. It was said that in order to gain power, she slaughtered her own family. Her purpose was to use some kind of evil spell to extract the power of other people in the family who had the blood of warlocks. This allowed her to advance to the legendary realm in just a few years and become the most powerful red dragon warlock in the south coast. And so far, no one had seen her fight with all her strength. Many people thought that she had the strength of a high-grade legendary. A high-grade legendary dragon warlock. Not only was he a powerful spellcaster, but he was also a fearsome warrior. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Her rise was more exaggerated than the rumored throat cutter. When this cruel woman first appeared, she appeared as the newlywed wife of the Duke of Rossard. However, shortly after she married the old Duke of Rossard, the old Duke had already died, and his 3 sons also died frequently in accidents. Finally, she took over the power as expected, and at the same time, she controlled a duchy at an amazing speed in just a few years. It could be said that she was one of the most feared women on the south coast. Her ruthlessness and cruelty were comparable to the drows in the Underdark. Almost anyone who dealt with her was very cautious because if they were not careful, they might be doomed eternally. The messenger slowly withdrew from the hall. Before leaving, he took a deep look at the woman on the throne, then turned and left. Chapter 343. On the way to the camp, the priests of the Goddess of Wealth had been observing the place. These people who believed in the Goddess of Wealth had keen insight, especially when it came to the grasp of wealth and business opportunities. Soren didn't know much about the Goddess of Wealth because she was usually a very low-key god. Even when the new Goddess of Wealth replaced the old Goddess of Wealth, people only discovered it hundreds of years later. The reason for this discovery was because the Goddess of Wealth had upgraded from a lesser divine power to a medium divine power, and at the same time, changed the position of her original clergy. In the past, the Goddess of Wealth was the Goddess of Trade and Wealth, and now the Goddess of Wealth was the Goddess of Trade and Wealth. A change in position meant that the amount of godly power she could control had increased by several times. The Goddess of Wealth, who used to have trade as her core clergy, had a huge fluctuation in her divine power. Once the war affected trade, her power began to be affected because there was basically no way to trade in that kind of situation, and naturally, there was no way to increase her divine power. But as wealth became the core of this lady's clergy, her divine power gradually stabilized, and because the Temple of Wealth became something like a bank, she maintained a strong divine power almost all the time, and because of this, she also touched the protection domain of money. Wealth, trade, money, and protection. This new successor of the goddess of wealth was only discovered by others at this time. She had already replaced the old goddess of wealth. From then on, the power of the goddess of wealth became a first-class force on the continent, and it occupied an important position in the game of the gods' churches. When Soren first heard of this knowledge, he was also quite surprised. Because he didn't think that just by changing the position of her clergy, it could cause such a big change, and let a god who was already on the verge of decline rush to the realm of great divine power in one breath. If it wasn't for the goddess of wealth's strong control of trade, and because the continent's trade was not developed enough, it was very likely that she would be the first god to enter the realm of great divine power in hundreds of years. There were neat rows of brick houses, straight drainage ditches. The layout of the streets was simple and clear, with shops, taverns, and blacksmiths, and specially built public toilets. It was not dirty and messy like other towns, and there wasn't even any garbage on the road. Everything here was clean and tidy, and because of this, others even thought that Soren had a slight obsession with cleanliness. "Your Excellency really surprises me." The priest of the Lady of Riches, who was decked in jewels, looked around. She could not help but reveal a thoughtful expression. Then she slowly said, "This place is full of vitality and vitality. That is the aura of wealth. Such a town. As long as there was a stable order, it would soon attract many merchants." The overseas trade was now in the hands of Soren. Port Tylon and the town that was being built in front of them were 2 points. They controlled the direction of the overseas trade route. As long as Soren was willing to open up a little, he could attract a large number of adventurous businessmen. Trade was exactly what the Lady of Wealth needed. It could expand her faith and strengthen her power. The decline of the City of Wealth temporarily affected trade. There was no way to recover from the chaos that happened before in a short period of time. This was also the reason why she came here. "Please." Soren raised his hand and made an inviting gesture, then turned around and entered the hall. Just as the priest of the Lady of Wealth sat down, Gloria, who was wearing a black witch robe, also appeared in the hall. She glanced at Soren slightly and then nodded gently. "Your Excellency." The priest of the Mistress of Wealth stood up and bowed slightly to Gloria to show her respect. As a representative from the Church of Wealth, she was well aware of Gloria's identity and status, as well as her influence in the Witch Council. She even knew that Gloria had been promoted and rewarded by the Witch Council because she had touched the realm of the legendary witches. Gloria smiled and nodded in response. She reached out and made an inviting gesture, as if she was the hostess here. She smiled and said, "Welcome, messenger of the Mistress of Wealth. Your arrival brings light to our humble dwelling." Everyone took their seats. The priest of the Mistress of Wealth glanced at the others, got up and smiled, "Just call me Gold. In fact, I did bring the goodwill of the Mistress of Wealth here." Gold? It was a strange monosyllabic name. The priest named Gold in front of him walked to the center of the hall and slowly said, "It seems that Your Excellency intends to develop this place into a city. I have to admit that Your Excellency has a unique vision. However, if you want to develop the remote outer islands, it will require a considerable amount of manpower and financial resources. As far as I know, although Your Excellency has a close relationship with the Sea Temple, they have not provided any help. On the contrary, a large part of Your Excellency's trade from the outer islands has to be handed over to them." Gold, who was dressed in jewelry, smiled slightly. Her delicate face was full of confidence. She took out a golden card and said seriously, "This is a divine power gold card of the Temple of Wealth. As long as you hold it, you can withdraw 100,000 Kindler from any Temple of Wealth on the continent at any time." She handed the gold card to Soren and smiled confidently, "This is just a gift from us to Your Excellency. Please don't refuse. This gift is not part of our next deal. Regardless of whether we cooperate or not, this gift only represents our intentions. And to express our gratitude to Your Excellency for re-establishing the rules of the South Coast and restoring the trade to normal order, 100,000 Kindler." This time, not only Soren, even Gloria next to him was surprised. With Soren's experience, it was not that he had never seen rich people. He had been in contact with a lot of the royal family, churches, and so on. However, it was really the first time he saw someone who could give 100,000 kindlers so easily. The Temple of Wealth was really rich. When the 100,000 kindler fell, even Soren could not help but breathe heavily. Then he smiled and reached out to take it. It would be a waste if he did not take it. He could never have too much money in his hands. Since she had already said that it was free, Soren naturally ate it first. Seeing Soren accept the Divine Power gold card, the Priest of Wealth showed a satisfied smile at the corner of her mouth. At the same time, her expression became more and more proud. The Temple of Wealth was so confident. No one could refuse them so firmly when they had money to open the way. Gold raised her finger and turned the ruby ring on her index finger. Then she gave a look to a servant next to her. Then someone handed a document to Soren. She was quite confident and said, "The Temple of Wealth has the most powerful strength on the south coast. The financial resources that Your Excellency needs to build here can be fully borne by us." At the same time, the Temple of Wealth also controls the largest and most mineral resources on the south coast. We have a very abundant slave resource, and we can replenish the manpower you need at any time. It can be said that compared to the Sea Temple that only squeezes profit from you, we can provide you more. As for what we need, it's just that you open this city to us, give us the free authority to trade overseas, and then build the Temple of Wealth here and let us develop believers for the goddess. Gold looked at Soren with some satisfaction. She believed that the generous conditions she offered could make the other party agree. But what she never expected was that after Soren took a look at the document, he said in a firm tone, "I'm sorry. I'm afraid I can't agree to these conditions." The conditions were actually quite good. The Temple of Wealth provided Soren with funds, manpower, and materials. The only requirement was to open up the city's authority, give them the authority to trade overseas, and at the same time, let them develop their faith and build a temple. For Soren, who had just completed the prototype, being able to get the support of the Temple of Wealth could greatly speed up the construction progress, but it was also quite dangerous for him. Because of the Sea Temple. Moreover, after Gloria heard the conditions, she was also calm on the surface, but secretly used her spiritual sense to deal with Soren. "You can't agree. The camp is connected to the Shadow Plane. We can't let other forces know about the existence of the Wizard Tower." "Yes." Hearing Gloria's words, Soren suddenly woke up. The value of the Wizard Tower was immeasurable. It must not be known to other forces. So no matter how good the conditions of the Temple of Wealth were, he could not agree. The authority of the city must be firmly in his own hands. Opening up the authority to build a temple would interfere with Soren's influence. Moreover, he relied on the Temple of the Sea behind him. Now that the Temple of the Sea Temple had not yet moved in, if he let the Temple of the Goddess of Wealth enter first, with the petty temper of the Sea Goddess, she might find out about it with Soren. Kim's face was full of astonishment. She did not expect Soren to refuse so firmly. Soren also did not want to be too stiff with the Temple of Wealth, not to mention that they had just given him 100,000 kindler. So he pondered for a moment and slowly said, "But as my goodwill, I'm willing to open up some of the authority to free trade to the Temple of Wealth. As for other things, I'm afraid I have to ask the Temple of the Sea for their opinion." The Temple of the Sea. Kim could not help but frown. She came here because she knew that the influence of the Temple of the Sea on Soren was far from that great. If he asked the Temple of the Sea, it was basically impossible to agree because the Temple of the Sea also needed faith. This place had not been developed yet. Once it became an existence similar to Port Tylon, the Temple of the Sea would immediately send priests to move in. At that time, how could the Temple of Wealth be allowed to enter? Although the forces of the gods were intricate, the establishment of a temple was like a carrot in a hole. The establishment of a temple meant that the foundation was laid. Look at Port Tylon. The Temple of the Sea and the Temple of the Storm fought countless times, but in the end, there was still no winner because both sides had the support of a temple. Building a temple here was equivalent to building half of a wizard tower. As long as the gods standing behind it had not fallen, who had the ability to pull out a temple with divine power in the end? In the Battle of Amber City. So many legendary challenge-level terror knights could not easily take down any of the temples. It could be seen how strong the defense of the temple was. Soren could not allow the power of the temple to enter his territory. Even, if possible, he wanted to exclude the power of the Temple of the Sea from the periphery. This was also the reason why he kept planning to expand the port. There were too many important secrets in the camp. Kim's expression was a little stunned and disappointed, but she did not give up because coming here was her task. If she did not complete the task, it meant that the temple's evaluation of her would be lowered. Gloria had a smile on her mouth and secretly said to Soren through telepathy, "Keep her steady. She still has important uses. We can use her as a bargaining chip and take the opportunity to make demands to the Temple of the Sea. Take both sides." Soren was stunned for a moment, and then he was also thoughtful. He could not help but turn his head and look at Gloria in surprise. This woman's political acumen was very high. Facing Soren's surprised eyes, Gloria smiled indifferently, then raised her hand and gently lifted the long hair on her earlobe, and looked at him with her eyes. "So." Soren stood up and said, "If you are not in a hurry, maybe you can stay here for a few days. I can immediately send someone to ask the Temple of the Sea. You should have seen the port here. The land there is very open. In fact, I am preparing to sell some of the land there. Although the price is a little expensive, I think you should be able to see the potential of the land with your vision." A very clever answer. The priest of the Lady of Riches was thoughtful when he heard that. He then looked at Soren deeply and said, "Of course. Okay. I will stay here and wait for your reply." He did not agree to the conditions of the exchange, nor did he agree to let them build a temple, but he was willing to sell a part of the land. This seemed to be very profound. In Kim's opinion, Soren was undoubtedly still quite afraid of the Temple of the Sea and did not want to lose the support of the Temple of the Sea. But he was also attracted by the superior conditions of the Temple of Wealth and did not want to easily give up such a powerful support. So there was such a euphemistic answer. If he was willing to sell the land near the port, then the ownership of the land would belong to the Temple of Wealth. Even if they could not build a temple openly, it could be used as a stronghold for the Temple of Wealth to develop their faith. As for whether they could build a temple here to strengthen their faith in the end, it was obvious that he wanted to see the strength of the two churches collide. A very cunning and treacherous man. He wanted to swallow the benefits from the two churches, but he did not want to be involved in the struggle for faith between the two churches. A piece of land. Kim had seen the terrain of the port. It was a very superior natural port. If this place developed into a place like Port Tylon, then the port would undoubtedly be the most prosperous place with the most people. The fleet coming and going would fill the entire port. On the contrary, the camp here was built inside and surrounded by mountains on two sides. One side was close to the tropical jungle, and it was a little far from the port. So, geographically speaking, it was not very superior. However, the terrain here was quite open and could be used to develop farmland. When she came, she saw a lot of farmland. She thought so in her heart. Kim could not help but have a little more contempt for Soren. After all, he was just a pirate leader who did not have much business sense. He only thought about the things dug out from the land and did not realize that the greatest wealth here was trade. If she were to build here, the city would definitely be close to the coastal port and directly build a port city. Now, if the port was developed, it was equivalent to laying out two cities. Even if they were relatively close to each other, they would not be connected in the end. With the powerful strength of the Temple of Wealth, it was not impossible to encroach on the port little by little. If they swallowed the port and occupied the core area of trade, then the value of the city here would be reduced a lot. Her excellent business vision made her realize that the port was the key. In the future, the struggle for faith would also be in the bustling port area. Now, the most important thing was the confrontation with the Temple of Sea. If they could not collide head-on, they could only give up part of the benefits to each other and strive to let each other take what they needed. The friction between two powerful gods' churches was a very scary thing. The group of believers from the Temple of Wealth was quickly settled down. When Kim left the hall, she could not help but see some drow warriors, which surprised her quite a bit. She turned around and took a deep look at Soren. Drows. This kind of creature was quite difficult to deal with. It seemed that they were the subordinates of this pirate. Maybe she had underestimated him too much. This group of people was settled near the south gate by Soren. At the same time, he secretly sent people to watch them to prevent these people from moving around in the camp at will. Gloria also quietly arranged a warning circle to block the area connected to the shadow plane. Now the portal had not been completely stabilized. If the portal was stabilized, the shadow cracks would be concentrated, and then other places in the camp would not be able to enter the shadow plane. The port was being developed, and when the time was right, they still had to be settled near the port. This may be an opportunity. Gloria waited until the priest of wealth and the others left, then immediately came to Soren and said, "The goodwill from the Temple of Wealth will make the Temple of Sea full of crisis. This can fight for more benefits for us." "I know." Soren nodded gently. But then he said in a deep voice, "But this matter must be considered carefully, because if we are not careful, we may offend two churches at the same time." Gloria frowned, then raised her fingertips and gently drew a line on the planning and construction map. She separated an area from it, and then slowly said, "Give up part of the benefits. Let them fight for it themselves." P.S. Today's first update, there will be more in the afternoon. Chapter 344. The arrival of the priest of the Lady of Riches made Soren a little more vigilant. That was, as his strength grew, he would inevitably attract the attention of many powerful veteran forces. This was something that could not be avoided. Perhaps when Soren was not strong enough, these forces would choose to ignore him. But when Soren broke through a certain threshold, they would inevitably come into contact with him. Fortunately, it was the priest of the Lady of Riches who came. If the Storm Temple secretly sent someone to contact him, things would be even more troublesome. This place was close to the rainforest of the Amazons. If he refused, he would be attacked. In the end, he was not strong enough. If Soren could ignore the influence of the Sea Temple, then he could confidently say, "This is my territory, I'm the boss." Advancing into the realm of legends. Soren felt that he had to speed up his progress. If there were 3 legendary figures in charge, no temple would dare to act rashly. So after settling down the priest of the Lady of Riches, Soren could take people to deal with the Quetzalcoatlus. Gloria was in the camp, and the wizard's eye was always monitoring the crack in the shadow plane. He was not worried that the other party would discover the secret here. So he took a group of people to hunt the Quetzalcoatlus early in the morning. As a dangerous dragon subspecies, they could bring Soren a lot of slaughter EXP, and he would definitely level up as a wizard. However, he still had to avoid casualties. It was not realistic for Soren to hunt these Quetzalcoatlus alone. The number of Quetzalcoatlus was probably more than one hand. The back of the mountain was a cliff. Soren had built a brick factory here, and the craftsmen from the east were busy. Behind the red land was a small river, and then it was the territory of the Quetzalcoatlus. There was feces of the Quetzalcoatlus here, so other creatures did not dare to come close. Soren's people were all grade 3 and above. Among them, there were elites who had participated in the White Dragon War. The dragon leather armor was in the process of being made. This process was not easy, and they might need the help of the drows. A group of people climbed up the mountain. Before they got close to the cliff, they heard the low roar of the Quetzalcoatlus. These dragon subspecies found them, but they did not attack. Instead, they roared at them and tried to drive them away. Swoosh! Soren shot an arrow at the wing of one of the Quetzalcoatlus. This provocation angered the beasts, and 2 of them roared and swooped down from the sky. Out of the way! Soren shouted, pulled out his curved sword icing death, leaped up, and stabbed into the Quetzalcoatlus' abdomen. The force of the dive knocked Soren away, but this force also turned into an impact, allowing Soren to cut open the belly of the Quetzalcoatlus in front of him, directly opening a wound nearly 2 meters long. A large amount of blood and intestines spilled out. Finally, the Quetzalcoatlus hit the ground with a bang, and half of its dragon wings smashed into Soren's abdomen. Cough, cough. Soren coughed and spat out a mouthful of blood. He had suffered some bruises, but it was worth it. The Quetzalcoatlus in front of him was on the verge of death. Poochie. The scimitar cut through the head of the Quetzalcoatlus and beheaded it. A row of data appeared, activated sword form, beheading. You've dealt 72/damage to the target. Beheading successful. Target dead. You've gained 5600 slaughter EXP. Soren's battle was glorious, but the situation on his men's side was not very good. Although they hit the enemy with their javelins when they spread out, one of them was hit by the Quetzalcoatlus. Even the iron armor could not withstand the sharp claws of the Quetzalcoatlus. Their chest was almost pierced through, and even their ribs were lifted up. The large dragon subspecies attack was quite fierce, and with the advantage of their large size, their strength was enough to send a mammoth flying. One of Soren's men was killed by a diving attack, and the Quetzalcoatlus immediately wanted to fly into the air. Of course, Soren would not let it fly. He immediately picked up a javelin and threw it. The javelin whistled out and hit the enemy's wing, causing it to stagger and fall to the ground. Without a chance to fly into the air, the Quetzalcoatlus immediately swept its tail, then opened its mouth to bite the nearest person. Let me do it. Soren needed to gain slaughter EXP, so he naturally could not let his men kill it. He shouted, everyone spread out and attack with javelins. Brute force. Haste. Soren activated the permanent haste spell on his legendary boots, and his whole body turned into a shadow as he rushed towards the Quetzalcoatlus. Although equipment with permanent spells could be activated for a whole day, it was not so convenient in normal life, and sometimes it could not achieve the effect of a surprise attack. Most of these permanent spells were activated during battle. Some of them were directly tattooed on the body by special means or other methods, and they could only be activated in a special environment. For example, there was a permanent spell like Dragon Wing. If it was exposed at the beginning, it was likely to be counterproductive because fission could sometimes destroy these permanent spells. Clang! The curved sword turned into a cold light and slashed on the back of the Quetzalcoatlus. After the battle with the white dragon and the red dragon, Soren could deal with these dragon subspecies easily. Perhaps it was more dangerous to fight one against many, but it was very easy with the help of his men. Whoosh! With the light of the sword, the Quetzalcoatlus in front of them was quickly killed. Soren stood next to the body of the Quetzalcoatlus and took a breath, then said in a deep voice, "Let's go directly. Don't worry about these bodies, we'll come back and take them away." The rugged mountain road meandered up. Sometimes there was no road at all, and they had to rely on the shuttle. They quickly climbed up the Quetzalcoatlus nest. Then they saw the two Quetzalcoatlus that were guarding the nest. The Quetzalcoatlus stayed in the nest and did not help their companions when they were attacked, nor did they run away when they encountered a powerful enemy. Then there was only one reason. Soren was a little stunned when he came up. Then he looked past the Quetzalcoatlus that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws but did not attack. He saw several dragon eggs hidden behind them. Spring seemed to be the season for Quetzalcoatlus to lay their eggs. Then in summer and autumn, the animals were fat and strong, so they could catch enough food to feed the hatched dragon eggs. Be careful. Soren looked at them seriously and then said, "All of you, back away. Don't attack those dragon eggs. Maybe these dragon eggs are still useful." It was quite difficult to tame dragon subspecies. However, if they hatched from the eggs, the difficulty of taming them would be reduced a lot. The Quetzalcoatlus growth cycle was very fast. As long as there was enough food, they could grow to more than 1,000 pounds in half a year. Although Soren did not know how to tame a Quetzalcoatlus, the drows had the skill to tame a petrifying lizard. Giant lizards were very similar to dragon subspecies, which meant that the possibility of taming them was about 30%. A 30% chance was enough for Sauron to give it a try. The others immediately backed away when they heard Soren's words. Soren approached the two Quetzalcoatlus in front of him. They were very uneasy facing Soren, but they did not leave the nest. Whether it was a pure-blood dragon or a mixed-blood dragon subspecies, the probability of laying eggs was not very high. Therefore, they would often protect their dragon eggs at all costs. Clang! A cold light flashed. Soren's figure strangely disappeared, and the next moment, he appeared behind the Quetzalcoatlus. However, he did not attack the enemy in front of him. Instead, he directly rushed to the dragon eggs and collected 5 of them in a dazzling speed. Attack! Soren turned around and stabbed his sword into the enemy's back. At the same time, he shouted, "Kill them!" As long as they did not have to worry about breaking the dragon eggs, they could attack freely. These Quetzalcoatlus in front of them were no match for them. If Soren activated his slaughter transformation, it would not be difficult for him to fight these Quetzalcoatlus alone. P.S. That's all for today. Chapter 345. Bang! As the last Quetzalcoatlus fell to the ground, Soren couldn't help but stand up while gasping for breath. He then clenched his teeth and pressed his arm, almost dislocating it from the Quetzalcoatlus attack. In front of him were 3 Quetzalcoatlus that were killed. One of them just came back from hunting, and there was also a zebra that was killed by it at the foot of the mountain. How are the casualties? Soren moved his arm and then turned around to look at his men. Just now, someone was knocked down by the Quetzalcoatlus near the dragon's nest. This place was hundreds of meters from the foot of the mountain, so it was basically impossible to survive. A small pirate leader counted the number of people and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency. 4 are dead and 7 are injured." Yes. Soren nodded silently. This number of casualties was still within the acceptable range. After all, they were dealing with a dragon subspecies. The possibility of no casualties was too small. A Quetzalcoatlus gave him nearly 5,000 slaughter EXP, cleaning up here gave Soren nearly 30,000 slaughter EXP, which was enough for him to level up his wizard profession. However, for the time being, Soren still had to hold back because he had already received the proficient spellcasting ability twice. If he received it again, he would be able to directly master the metamagic ability. The progress of casting in battle was relatively slow. However, if he mastered the proficient spellcasting ability, the speed of casting in battle would also increase. Many abilities were complementary to each other. There were so many Quetzalcoatlus corpses that they couldn't transport back quickly. Soren could only bring them back first and then arrange for his men to transport them back. This small matter would be taken care of by the pirate leaders below. Soren himself took the 5 dragon eggs back. After dealing with these Quetzalcoatlus, the camp should be completely safe. Unless there were some dangerous creatures that migrated here, there shouldn't be any attacks in the near future. In the camp, Soren just came back and saw the followers of the Priest of Riches. They were obviously also observing this place, but because of Soren's ban, they could only secretly observe the layout of this place. The location of the Shadow Fissure was close to the warehouse, and no one was allowed to casually approach it. At most, they could only observe the situation of the south and east gate. Brother? Not long after Soren returned, Vivian appeared. Today, she was wearing a black princess dress, and her beautiful long hair was tied up in a bow. Her big round eyes looked around restlessly when she came in, and then her gaze fell on the dragon eggs that Soren had neatly placed on the table. Behind the little girl was the petite cat girl. Today, she seemed to be very well behaved. She was a little nervous as she followed behind Vivian. She was not as relaxed as she was yesterday. He didn't know if it was because the little girl in the black princess dress gave her a lot of pressure today, or if it was because of some other reason. The little girl widened her eyes and looked around. Then, she raised her little head and said, "Big brother. Are these all dragon eggs?" Shit. When Vivian opened her mouth, Soren knew that this was bad. He knew that the little girl had always wanted to raise a majestic pet. Now that she had seen these dragon eggs, she might even want to raise one. Aya. The little girl skipped closer to the table and reached out her white little hand to touch the eggs. Then, she cheered, they really are dragon eggs. I've always wanted to raise one. Big brother, you're the best. Mwack. Vivian stood on the chair, tiptoed, and kissed Soren on the cheek. Then, she hugged the dragon egg and ran outside. She ran as fast as the wind. According to the little girl's judgment, there was a 90% chance that Soren would not agree to her raising such a dangerous creature. However, she had always wanted to raise a majestic pet. In the end, she decided to ignore everything and run away with the dragon egg after kissing her brother. When the baby dragon hatches in 2 days, her brother would probably not object. Way. Vivian. Soren opened his mouth to say something but stopped. In the end, he sighed softly. He was indeed worried about letting the little girl raise a dragon, even if it was a sub-dragon species. Dragons had hereditary memories, and sub-dragon species were born with a wild nature. It was not as if they would treat whoever hatched them as their parents the moment they saw the egg. That was the plot in the bard's stories. In reality, the dragon egg would let the baby dragon attack as soon as it hatched. The dragon's hereditary memories would teach them their instincts. The real taming of dragons was done with spells and brainwashing. It's okay. Gloria's figure appeared outside the door. She was wearing a long black dress, and her hair was casually tied up with a hairband. After entering the door, she glanced at Lulu who was sneaking out. Then, she said to Soren, with Vivian's current strength, raising a sub-dragon shouldn't be dangerous. If it's a pure-blood dragon, it might be a little dangerous. She walked to the table, glanced at the remaining dragon eggs, and said softly, "Are you planning to tame them?" Soren nodded slightly and said, "That's an idea." Gloria reached out and touched the dragon eggs, then frowned slightly and said, "This one has no breath of life. It's very difficult to tame dragon creatures. Only the people of Dragon City know the secret. Maybe it's easy to hatch them and control them, but it's quite difficult to make them listen to orders." Soren pressed his palm on the dragon egg that Gloria pointed out. Sure enough, he found that the breath of life was quite weak. There was no way to hatch this dragon egg. Even if it was a pure-blood dragon's egg, there would be some that could not hatch. Sometimes, it was similar to eggs. When a nest of dragon eggs hatched, the proportion of baby dragons born in the end could only be regarded as average. Soren put the dragon egg aside and replied, "Let's try it first." The drows have the skill to tame petrified lizards. During this time, they relied on me to provide them with materials, but only sent a team of drows to work. It's time for them to do something, and at the same time, test the attitude of those female drows. If these female drows still don't understand the situation, they can't blame me for being merciless. Speaking of this, Soren's eyes flashed with a cold light. Gloria raised her hand and gently lifted her long hair, looking a little worried, and said, "The drows are a race used to conspiracy and betrayal. I still can't trust them. You'd better be more careful." The underground creatures did not trust the surface creatures, and the surface creatures did not trust the underground creatures. Soren did not speak, but nodded gently and said, "I know. They can't make any waves. If they do anything, I'll erase them immediately." Gloria gently nodded, then took out a scroll and handed it to Soren, and said, "During this time, Vivian and I have been studying how to arrange the teleportation circle to connect to the shadow plane and decipher the mystery of this magic scroll. The little girl's talent is really amazing. Even I am surprised by her learning speed. I'm afraid it won't be long before she can completely surpass me." The deciphering of Melf's minute meteors has been completed. This is a copy we made. The spell has been analyzed in words that you can understand. However, there is still a paragraph in the original version of the secret text that we haven't been able to decipher. It doesn't seem to be part of the spell, but more like an improved technique of an arcanist. For the time being, Vivian and I haven't been able to decipher it. It's a text created by an individual, so it will take a long time to fully understand it. Text. There were many languages in this world. When a wizard's strength reached a certain level, they also liked to create their own secret text. For example, if you drew a twisted wavy line, it would be a wavy line in the eyes of others, but in the text you created, it would mean something else. This kind of secret text created by a wizard was the most difficult to decipher. Unless the corresponding spell book was found, or some special ability was used to understand it. So even Gloria, who had a lot of knowledge, couldn't decipher it in a short time. Finally, the deciphering is complete. Soren reached out and took the scroll in front of him, then nodded and said, "Very good. I'll memorize it as soon as possible." Gloria's arrival was a great help. Vivian spent more than a month to decipher the spell, Melf's Minute Meteors, but not long after she came, she had completed most of the analysis. Soren was quite looking forward to this spell. "Okay." Gloria smiled and looked at Soren, then turned and left the hall. Night fell. Soren went back to his room after making some arrangements for the night watch. He carefully spread out the magic scroll in front of him, then picked up a quill and copied on the snow-white paper. The white paper was filled with dense symbols, and he finished writing a stack of white paper. Only then did he rub his forehead and sigh. Why is it so hard? Soren felt a little dizzy. He got up and opened the window to get some fresh air, then sat back down. The difficulty was too high. Although this was only a level 3 spell, Soren felt that it was harder to master than a level 5 spell. He studied for half a day, but he couldn't even complete the prototype of the spell model. At this rate, it would take at least half a month to memorize it. It seemed that there were very few spells that were so difficult for him to learn since he became a wizard. The night passed quickly. Soren almost didn't sleep all night. He only put down the quill and rested for a while when it was close to dawn the next day. The progress of the spell model analysis was less than 3%. There was a pile of paper on the table that was nearly 10 centimeters thick with all kinds of symbols and words. Soren rubbed his forehead to relax his nerves, then he began to memorize the spells that he had mastered in the past. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Soren got up and left the room to practice the spells. When he had just finished using all the level 1 spells, the long-awaited prompt finally appeared, "Ability improved." After a long period of practice, you have obtained some information about the ability, Skillful Spellcasting. You have mastered the ability, Skillful Spellcasting. Chapter 346. Finally, he got it. When the data prompt for mastering abilities appeared in front of him, Soren actually had an illusion of sighing in his heart. It was much harder to master a spellcaster's ability compared to other abilities. A lot of melee abilities could be mastered in a year and a half, but even the simplest spellcasting ability would take a lot of time. From the moment Soren started to become a wizard, spellcasting proficiency had been accumulating experience points, but it was only now that he truly mastered it. Even with encyclopedic knowledge and sage, it still took him a long time to master it. Spellcasting proficiency, spellcasting ability. As you cast spells again and again, your mastery of spells will gradually increase. This will increase your mastery of any spell. When you cast any spell, you can reduce the casting time by 1. If you cast a spell that only takes a second to cast, then you can turn it into an instant cast spell. This spellcasting time reduction effect can be stacked with spellcasting speed enhancement effect from other equipment. Arcane Missile. Soren gently raised his finger. Without chanting any spell, as if he was very familiar with it, he completed the spellcasting naturally. Then, a series of arcane missiles shot out and completely penetrated the target in front of him. Spellcasting proficiency was the core ability of a wizard. Many of the metamagic abilities that he would master in the future were accumulated from this. Since he had already mastered spellcasting proficiency, Soren did not need to continue saving slaughter EXP. A row of data appeared in front of him. Wizard profession has leveled up to level 10. Received 27, INT 21 plus, INT 21 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 10, profession HP 4 plus, con 22 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Received 1 free attribute point. Received 1 ability point. Soren allocated the skill points to literacy and focus. He still could not master spellcasting in battle quickly because he did not have enough focus. It was easy to be interrupted in battle. The focus ability of a wizard had a wide range of uses. Whether it was learning spellcasting or spellcasting in battle, it had to pass a focus test. Pure wizards usually had a higher focus level. The ability that tested one's focus the most was mobile spellcasting. When casting spells while moving, one's focus would always be judged. Soren allocated his free attribute points to intelligence. In the future, when he wanted to learn legendary spells, the higher the intelligence, the better. Then, there was the very important specialization. Spell maximization, metamagic specialty. This metamagic specialty can maximize the power of spells. At the cost of increasing 2 spell levels, the damage of a spell is increased by 100%. For example, a level 1 spell, Arcane Missile, would become a level 3 spell after using the metamagic ability to enhance spells. At the same time, the damage of Arcane Missile would be increased by 100%. Note, prerequisite to enhance spells. Silent spellcasting, metamagic ability. This metamagic ability can silently cast a spell at the cost of increasing the spell's level. This allows a spell to be cast silently without any casting action or incantation. Silent spell casting ignored all silent spells, and it was difficult for the enemy to discover that a wizard was casting spells. Silent spell cast can be disguised under any movement until the moment the spell is cast. Only then can the enemy detect it. Note, epic talent, silent spell casts prerequisite. Instant cast spell, metamagic specialty. This metamagic specialty can instantly cast a spell at the cost of increasing the spell's level by 3 to make it an instant cast spell. Instant spellcasting could not be interrupted by any conventional means, and it was immune to all silent spells and counterspells. Note, prerequisite to epic spell casting. Soren looked at the 3 options in front of him and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Among them, spell maximization belonged to the damage category. It could greatly increase the power of spells. If he wanted to go all the way down the path of Arcane Missile, then this ability was quite useful. Then, there was silent spell casting. This was a very effective ability to sneak up on the enemy. During the Astral War, Her Excellency the Eye of the North used silent spell casting. During the whole process, no one noticed that she was preparing a legendary spell. It was only when the legendary spell was completed that others realized it. This ability was very popular among arcane tricksters in the past because it could surprise the enemy. Finally, there was instant spell casting, which everyone was very familiar with. It could directly turn a spell into an instant spell at the cost of increasing 3 spell levels. This was a very useful but costly metamagic ability. Whether it was silent spell casting or instant spell casting, they were all prerequisites for future epic abilities. After mastering this metamagic ability, a legendary wizard could successively master instant spell casting, silent spell casting, level 0, instant spell casting, silent spell casting, level 1, instant spell casting, silent spell casting, level 2, and so on. As long as this epic ability was mastered, there was no need to increase the spell level of the corresponding level. For example, if one mastered the epic ability instant spell casting, level 1, then all the level 1 spells would automatically become instant spell casting. There was no need to use additional level 4 spell slots to memorize them. This epic ability could be upgraded all the way to level 9. When one mastered the epic ability instant spell casting, level 9, all level 9 spells would become instant spell casting. There was no need to use additional spell slots to memorize them. That was why many wizards mastered the instant spell casting in advance. This was to save ability points and upgrade all the epic ability instant spell casting after entering the realm of legends. Unfortunately, Soren had never seen anyone succeed. It could be said that the most powerful spellcaster he had ever seen was Arendelle's Princess Royal. However, even she didn't master the epic ability instant spell casting, level 9. At most, she could only instant spell casting, level 6. This was a choice. It determined whether a spellcaster wanted to be the most powerful one, or give up on pursuing the path of being the most powerful and to master other easier and more practical abilities, such as spell casting, silent spell casting, spell delay, and so on. The Eye of the North chose to cast a silent spell. This meant that it was almost impossible for her to touch the path of being the most powerful wizard. She could only go further and further on the path of silent spell casting. Silent spell casting. And Arendelle's Princess Royal, and now Vivian, both walked the path of being the most powerful wizard. Soren could be sure of one thing. Vivian definitely mastered instant spell casting. Otherwise, her casting speed wouldn't be so fast. Many low-level spells didn't even need to be chanted. However, now that it was his turn to choose, Soren didn't know which path he should choose. If he chose spell maximization, he would pursue the most powerful spell damage. In the future, when combined with epic spell penetration, he would be able to explode with amazing destructive power. However, if he chose instant spell casting, he might be able to touch the path of being the most powerful wizard in the future. This was a difficult choice. Chapter 347. Soren fell into deep thought. Unknowingly, he had returned to his room. When he saw the scroll of the level 3 spell, Melf's Minute Meteor, on the table, he seemed to have remembered something and made a decision. The instant casting of spells was basically done after the legendary level. The most important thing for him now was his current combat power. It was too difficult to hold on to the ability to cast instant spells all the way to the legendary level. He might even have the ability to become a god by then. If he could become a god, it was not impossible to replace the ability to cast instant legendary spells in the future. The realm of the gods was full of mystery. So Soren quickly made a decision and silently said, "I choose the metamagic ability, spell maximization." Once the ability was chosen, Soren's thoughts were completely opened. He quickly had new ideas about the total number of spells he had mastered, the combat application of various spells, and the types of spells to memorize. First, the level 1 spells. Defensive spells were not very useful for Soren, who had amazing dexterity and strong constitution. It could be said that most of the level 1 spells were not as good as him drawing his sword and slashing it twice. Therefore, all the level 1 spell slots were used to memorize. Arcane Missile. Soren currently had 6 level 1 spells. If he memorized all of them, he could rely on the ability, spellcasting proficiency, to instantly cast 30 missile attacks, which was equivalent to a level 6 spell, Missile Storm. Note, Arcane Missile limit is 5, Lesser Missile Storm limit is 15, casting time is 2 seconds, Advanced Missile Storm limit is 30, casting time is 3 seconds. In addition to the Transformation Combat Wizard, there were also the Cold Wizard, the Death Immunity Wizard, the Missile Burst Wizard, and the Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms Wizard. The most powerful ones should be the Transformation Wizard and the Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms Wizard. These two wizard systems were born before the Arcane Empire. Currently, there were very few people who could master these two sets of combat spells. Note, Bigby, one of the most famous combat wizards in history. The inventor of Bigby's Protective Palm, level 5, Bigby's Flying Palm, level 6, Bigby's Grappling Palm, level 7, Bigby's Diamond Palm, level 8, and Bigby's Crushing Palm, level 9. These 5 spells are the legendary Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms, a set of combat spells enough to kill a legendary warrior in a head-on fight. There were 2 sets of spells that could challenge the gods. The first was the Melf's Minute Meteor that Soren discovered, and the second was the Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms. Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms. Among them, Melf's Minute Meteors had an even lower casting requirement. Once the idea was open, the ideas were much easier. Soren was not lacking in survivability, so there was no need for him to memorize a large number of defensive spells like other wizards. Therefore, the spell slots he had were used for support and burst attacks. The level 2 spells were brute force and cat's grace. The remaining 3 spell slots were all used to memorize arcane missile, empower spell. Level 3 spells to be. However, Soren chose to give up on memorizing most of the spells. He only kept fly, and then used all the other spell slots to memorize arcane missile, maximum spell. In this way, his BU arcane missile storm had been formed. From level 1 to level 3, he had memorized a total of 12 arcane missiles. With such a missile storm attack, it was not difficult to drown the enemy in an instant. Starting from level 4 spells, Soren's spell memory was a lot more cautious. This was because it was the key to the battle and also an important ability buff. He chose brute force, extreme spell, cat's grace, extreme spell, and greater invisibility. As a professional level 10 wizard, Soren had the last 2 level 5 spell slots. However, he did not want to memorize other spells because he was going to use them to memorize his trump card. That was Melf's Minute Meteor. This was a level 3 spell. With the help of the metamagic ability, Extreme Spell, it required level 5 spell slots to be memorized. Since it was to maximize the lethality, he naturally could not use level 3 spell slots to memorize it. For the first time, Soren had a fairly clear position on the choice of spell memory. As a top rogue, he was still a novice in the field of wizards. Until the spells and abilities he had mastered gradually took shape, his mind began to gradually become clear. Although he had 22 points of intelligence and a level 10 wizard, Soren could only use about 20 spell slots. The lack of spell slots made him unable to cast spells calmly like other wizards. He could only turn the core of the battle into an instant burst, as much as possible to match his rogue's fighting style. The spell was formed. Soren became clearer about his position. He looked at his remaining 80,000 slaughter EXP and chose to memorize most of the core spells in his mind. In this way, he avoided the trouble of needing a spell book to memorize them. Professional level 10 was a watershed. From here on, the slaughter EXP needed to level up to more than 100,000. Especially spellcasting professions, it would increase by more than 20% compared to other melee professions. In a short time, Soren probably did not have much slaughter EXP to allocate to his wizard profession level. Instead, he was preparing to focus on the legendary rogue skill, Shadow Realm. The morning passed quickly. After Soren sorted out his thoughts, he opened the attribute page. Now he was no longer a thief on the streets of Amber City. Even compared to the past, he had many advantages in many aspects. For example, abilities. Now, his attributes had become: name, Soren. Race, half-elf, son of slaughter. Attributes: strength 19, plus 7, giant strength plus 6, agility 26, plus 2, constitution 22, plus 1, intelligence 22, plus 2, wisdom 16, plus 1, charm 19, plus 3, Mohs sorrow plus 2. Alignment, lawful evil. Profession, level 10 commoner, level 7 rogue, 01265500, level 5 shadow dancer, 018500, level 10 wizard, 01485500, grade 4. Health points, 292292, sturdy. EXP, 72075, slaughter EXP, 1545, professional EXP, unassigned. Skill points, none. Attribute points, none. Legend level, 27. Divinity, 12, minor divinity. Requires 30 points to upgrade, minor divinity. Status, normal. Basic skills, sneak 225, literacy 275, steal 75, pick lock 80, snare 75, focus 65, negotiation 75, appraise 45, deception 40, intimidation 75, taunt 20, act 25, listen 45, evasion 120, parry 55, block 30, heal 65, search 45, detect 50, scroll copy 45, spellcraft 35, survival 45, use magic device 35, cooking 35, alchemy 25. Legendary skills, omnipotent hands, epic dexterity. Special abilities, blessing of the misfortune goddess, blessing of the sea goddess, dragon blood baptism LV2, killing heart, slayer, ascetic, scholar. Personal abilities, nimble left hand, eidetic memory, perseverance, encyclopedic knowledge, spellcasting proficiency, reflex evasion, evasion intuition, roll evasion, nimble movement, evade sight, dark vision, spell control, empower spell, maximize spell, minor spell resistance, minor cold resistance, minor fire resistance, minor poison resistance, minor electric resistance, greater dual wielding, sturdy, regeneration, intermediate, telepathy 10 feet. Profession abilities, shadow weave, military weapon, proficiency, curved sword, legendary. Combat skills, summon shadow, shadow leap, shadow strike, shadow jump, fear gaze, divine, fear, divine, vampiric touch, divine, counterspell, sword form, heavy hack, sword form, horizontal slash, sword form, behead, sword form, spinning strike. Attributes, skills, and abilities. A powerful professionist was built up from these three elements. Now Soren had basically surpassed other professions of the same level in these three elements. The only obvious shortcoming was that his taunt skill was only 20 points. There was no other way. Soren's fighting style had always been to get rid of the enemy quickly. There was basically no chance to taunt the enemy, so his taunt skill was the one that grew the slowest. Perhaps it was because he had more contact with women, his acting ability had improved, but his taunt skill had not increased much. Time passed day by day. Soren devoted most of his energy to the process of analyzing Melf's minute meteor, but he was still busy with the layout of the camp. At the same time, some information from the outside world was sent over from Port Tylon. War broke out. There were local conflicts between the orcs in the north and the southern kingdom, and the small-scale war made the situation even more confusing. The rebels on the south coast counterattacked a city, and the decaying kingdom announced that they were bewitched by the evil devil. At the same time, they urgently called on the nobles in the kingdom to wipe out the rebels. Unfortunately, there were very few people who responded. It seemed that in this period of chaos, many people had felt the premonition of the coming turmoil. The old aristocratic forces wanted to preserve their strength, and not many people were willing to expend too much energy at this time. Especially when the main force of the rebels had not been hit hard. There were only various rumors about the devil hiding behind the scenes, but no one could be sure of his identity. South gate of the camp. A sneaky figure came from the side, then climbed into a room through the window. Sir Priest. The thin figure took off his cloak, then bowed slightly and said, "I didn't find anything. The guards at the warehouse are too strict, and there are magic traps set up by the witch. I dare not rashly go over and alarm them." There were many rogues among the believers of the Lady of Riches. He was one of them disguised as a follower, and he had been secretly trying to spy here since he arrived at the camp. Yes. Kim was wearing a priest's robe inlaid with pearls and gems. She nodded slightly and said, "It's never wrong to be careful. Although he is friendly to us, it's best not to provoke him. Is there any news from the temple?" Standing behind her was a middle-aged man, who looked like an ordinary follower, but in fact, he was a grade 3 wizard. The followers of the Lady of Riches were very wide, and there were naturally many wizards who gave their faith to money. He immediately replied, "There is no clear news yet, but the church is secretly sending people to negotiate with the Sea Temple." Level 5 spell, message spell. After listening to his words, Kim pondered for a moment, then said, "Let them speed up. The decline of the City of Riches may make the goddess dissatisfied with us. If we can open up the route here, the prosperous trade can enhance the goddess' power and influence." Yes. The middle-aged man nodded. At this time, sitting in the corner, a young woman who looked like a woman, but not a professional, more like a merchant, said, "Kim. Is it necessary to be so anxious? I don't think this throat cutter has much business sense at all. These days, I often go out and walk around and find that he has invested most of his manpower and material resources into that broken land. These newly cultivated lands are basically of little value. Even if the weather is good for a year, they can't make much money. It's estimated that it's not as good as the wealth of a ship's round-trip trade. With this time, energy, manpower, and material resources, if all of them are invested in the construction of the port, I'm afraid that the wealth earned in 1 year is comparable to the income of 20 years of farming. In the end, he is just a short-sighted country tycoon who only knows how to guard that land. Kim turned and glanced at her. It seemed that the young woman's status was quite high, so her attitude and tone were softer. She slowly shook her head and said, "Maybe it's not that simple. A pirate king who can rise in such a short time is definitely not a simple character. Maybe he's plotting something bigger." Plotting something bigger? The others couldn't help but fall into deep thought. What was the bigger scheme behind this? Only then would they value the land more than the wealth at their fingertips. When the young woman heard this, she seemed to be deep in thought. Her eyes couldn't help but light up slightly. Sea Temple. Accompanied by the sound of something being smashed, the angry roar of the Naga siren priest came from the hall. "How dare you? This ingrate that can't be fed. I don't even know when he got involved with the Church of Riches." The Naga siren priest had an angry expression on her face, and she took a deep breath to calm down. A strange voice came from the side, which seemed to be coming from the sea under the temple. It said faintly, "Your Excellency. What should we do now?" The Naga siren priest closed her eyes and pondered for a moment. Then she opened her eyes and said, "This guy is getting harder and harder to control. No. We must send people to build the temple. He has developed a little in the outer islands. It's time to establish the faith of the sea goddess there." The strange voice continued to come from under the sea. "What about the Church of Riches? These guys are not easy to deal with. Agree to their request." The Naga siren priest smirked and said slowly, "But they have to pay the price. Since they want to intervene in the outer islands, they must give up part of their own interests. Tell them that we must be allowed to spread our faith among the fishermen in the coastal areas before we agree to expand their trade in the outer islands." Faith exchange. This was the plan of the Naga siren priest. It had always been difficult for the Sea Temple to find a breakthrough in the inland areas. They had been trapped near Port Tylon for nearly 100 years. Now the request of the Church of Riches was also an opportunity for her to spread her faith to the coastal areas. She did not dare to put forward conditions that were too excessive. She only targeted the fishermen who were likely to become believers of the sea goddess. As for whether they would further expand the scope and influence of the sea goddess after establishing a foundation along the coast, that was something to be discussed in the future. The rich catch could easily open a breakthrough for them. As long as the Church of Riches gave them a little authority, they could take root among the humans. As for who would gain more and have more influence in the end, it would depend on the strength of each other's churches. The Naga siren priest was very confident about this because as long as the sea route was cut off, the situation of the Church of Riches would be quite passive. Thinking of this, the corners of her mouth could not help but reveal a trace of a sinister smile. In the gloomy valley, the strong smell of blood almost enveloped the land. There were dead vampire bats everywhere, as well as those ferocious vampire servants. In the center were the bodies of the dark guards. As powerful fallen advanced professions, they finally died under the siege of the dense vampire bats. How is it possible? The black-robed priest was covered in blood from head to toe. Under his tattered black robe, his full body armor was exposed. He held a heavy warhammer in one hand and a shining shield in the other. His expression was a little blank as he murmured, "How could I have failed?" There were only 5 followers left near him. In the end, all the survivors were priests, high-grade priests who could wear full-body armor and a shield. At the same time, it did not affect their spellcasting ability. In such a fierce battle, priests were always the kind of people who could stand firm to the end. Patter. The figure of the demigod vampire fell from midair. There were quite serious burn marks on his chest, but the flesh and blood there were rapidly regenerating. At this moment, he did not have the elegant and calm expression at the beginning because half of his head seemed to be severely burned. Many high-grade dark guards fell nearby, and there were only a few surviving vampire servants. Relying on a group of cannon fodder to deal with the dark guards, the price paid was naturally quite heavy. It's over. The demigod vampire showed a proud smile on his face and said slowly, "The elites of the Church of Fear were all buried here by you. Even if you go back alive, the high priest will not let you go. Have you thought about it? Choose to serve me. Or choose to die. Now that you no longer have the ability to stop me, why are you obsessed with believing in a god who is about to fall? Be loyal to me. You are the next chief priest. What he can give you, I can also give you." Clang. The sound of a weapon falling to the ground. The black-robed priest in front of him seemed to have given up resistance and slowly knelt on the ground. Ha ha ha. The demigod vampire showed a satisfied smile and couldn't help but burst into laughter. After defeating the elites of the Church of Fear, they no longer had the ability to stop him from stealing the divine power of fear. When the divine power of fear accumulated to a certain extent, then he would be qualified to touch the divine power of fear. In a dark corner in the valley, the Helpheimer took back the magic flute in his palm. He was surrounded by corpses that died in various ways, but one thing in common was that their expressions when they died were very peaceful. He silently looked at the demigod vampire in front of him, and his eyes seemed to shine with a strange light. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.